Sally, this is Lauren from Zephyr Astrology, and today we are going to be doing a natal chart analysis, and this is my premium video delivery. So we are going to take quite some time going in depth about your natal chart and just talking a little bit about your astrological energy. And I hope that you really enjoy this reading and that you get a lot out of it. At the end, we will also go over the Saturn return information and the soulmate information per the other readings you had in your orders. So of course, if you have any questions at the end of viewing this video in its entirety, feel free to let me know, but I hope that you enjoy.
But hopefully this will give you a lot of clarity around your chart and a lot of these core themes and energies that surround your core purpose and inner self. So I'm really excited to dive into this. So the way that I am structuring this reading for today is that we are going to be going into, I separated this into 5 parts. So we have and the first 3 parts are your natal chart. So we're going to do an overview and talk about your big 3. Then we are going to dive into life themes between the houses and the planets. Then we're going to talk about aspects, the accesses, as well as some current transits that are impacting you. Then in part 4, we'll dive deeper into the Saturn return. And then part 5, we will talk about the soulmates. So including those other 2 readings that you had. And that way you don't have to get separate deliveries for everything. It all just comes to you at once in a video format. So this will probably take a couple hours to go through in its entirety. So definitely, sit back, get comfortable. Obviously, if you're driving operating a motorized vehicle, maybe don't watch, just listen. For the most part, we're just going to kind of point around at your chart a little bit. So with all of that being said, let's just go ahead and dive into natal chart because I want to get through as much of this as I can by the 60-minute marker before we start getting into the Saturn return and some other stuff. So one of the first things that I like to draw people's eye to, and I'm going to try not to overly complicate things with this overview, with the basics, I'm kind of looking at this little distribution chart right here. What this essentially is this talks a lot about zodiacal signs and like the weight of how they're impacting your chart. And what you can do is, based on some of these scores, we can tell what is like sort of your weakest area of energetic expression and what is the most strengthened or visible area of energetic expression. So here we can see you have a low amount of fire energy. We see that Mercury is there. So that's going to be an interesting nod. We're going to come back to that later. And you have a lot of air emphasis. So we got, 4 planets in air. And then we have cardinal emphasis, fixed emphasis, immutable emphasis. Now these are modalities, the way in which each sign expresses themselves. And these are the elements. So elements kind of talk about like energy, and then modality talks about approach. So for an example, let's talk about what is indicated as your chart signature here. So you have a lot of fixed and you have a lot of air. So your chart expresses itself as fixed air primarily. And so fixed is an energy that talks about sustainability and talks about consistency and longevity. And then air is cerebral and intellectual. So we know a lot of your core expression is going to come out or be facilitated through this sort of Aquarian expression that is divided among the 8th and 9th houses. Now, that's not to say there aren't other elements of expression that are going to be visible or going to be apparent, but a lot of the core energy, or a lot of what the energy leads back to, what your final dispositor is, those things are placed, in the sign of Aquarius in this chart. So that energy does come off the strongest. Now we see that you have some weakness of expression in fire, but you also have weakness of expression in mutability, which deals with, associations like being euphemism, passion, assertiveness, right? Being very direct, very bold. And then mutability is about flexibility, pliability, being being able to sort of like creatively think outside the box, although Aquarius has that trait as well. So we see that there is their lowest expression or area where you might have some difficulty is associated with the 6th house in Sagittarius, because that is the weakest enhancement in terms of zodiacal sign or signification in this chart. So that's just talking a lot about some of the basics of how an astrologer can look at this. There are a lot of other basics that I like to dive into, but some of those can be a little bit more advanced in terms of the technique or the approaches. So I'm just going to dive into the big 3 here for you today. So one of the first things we always go to talk about is the ascendant, and it's because the ascendant marks the moment you took your first breath, and therefore this was sort of like the energy you first sort of entered the world into, or sort of the circumstances in which you entered this world. And oftentimes this is going to be that first impression that people get from us. Now, this is sort of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg in concept, because the rising sign can describe the face we show to the world, or the styles that we adapt when we are initiating things, when we are being introduced to things for the first time, how we greet the world, or how we seek attention, or how we seek a means to connect. So this is sort of the doorway of one's chart. Everything else is sort of housed within the chart. So everything sort of funnels through the doorway of the ascendant. And so when you have a Cancer ascendant, your chart is ruled by the moon. So the moon's here at Gemini in the 12th house. We'll kind of go back to that later, but we're just going to talk about the Cancer rising right now. So typically when you have Cancer on the ascendant, because this is linked with the moon, it's a naturally sensitive sign. It's a cardinal water sign. So this sign does prefer to take action or control the narrative. It tends to be initiative, but it's initiative based on subjectivity, like how we view the world emotionally, or for the pursuit of our innermost desires. And that's a lot of how the identity is constructed. The first house is the house of identity, the house of self. So you oftentimes can appear to be gentle and soft and act reserved. This is even more so because your moon's in the 12th, but just as a baseline, most Cancer ascendants are reserved and kind of shy. My brother-in-law has this ascendant, and he's adorable because when you get to know him, he has all these planets in Aries, so he's got like a sharp tongue. Like he just comes off very like he's got a chip on his shoulder a little bit, because Aries is ruled by Mars, but that Cancer ascendant softens him. It's like, this is typically an energy where it's represented by the crab in terms of the zodiacal animal. And zodiac means wheel of animals, by the way. So because it's represented by the crab, there's like this hard exterior, and then there's that gooey softness on the inside. And so oftentimes Cancer ascendant people sort of know inherently they have a sense of heightened sensitivity, or there is some sense of vulnerability. So they oftentimes try to, not draw a lot of attention to themselves, or they present the shell, the hardened exterior first. So oftentimes this is most likely to occur by acting reserved, but there's a strong need, again, for emotional security, or a strong need to belong. The moon astrologically is linked to connections, communities, and units. So it's strongly connected with the 4th house of family, because that's the first sort of unit that you are a part of when you come into this world. And so oftentimes these Cancer ascendant people are looking for settings in which they can get that sense of familial belonging. And this shows a lot of time that the identity can be strongly entrenched in experiences from the past, or experiences from our family and origin. Typically this sign is resistant to making changes. It's not that you can't make changes, it's that you have to be emotionally posed and ready to make changes. So oftentimes you have to feel emotionally comfortable in order to pursue something with a sense of contentment or being okay with it. But once you are emotionally in a state where you feel motivated to move forward, this sign can be very ardent in how it pursues things. There is a tendency, though, to become very emotionally attached to things. So comfort, emotional comfort, is a lens in which Cancer ascendants view the world. So again, you approach the life subjectively and emotionally, and you can be very empathic. So Cancer ascendant people have a way of reading the energy of the room. And because this sign is it leans into a sense of wanting to play a matriarchal role, or to nourish or restore or heal in some ways. Oftentimes these people get drawn into environments in which they can help, or like their help is welcomed. So there is typically some sort of emotional drive to want to connect and instinctively provide some sort of emotional, or maybe realize tangible value in the environments that you step into. Obviously, there is a natural protective nature for Cancer ascendants. They can be loyal, especially if emotionally their needs are fulfilled. And again, there's a very nurturing or maternal nature. This ascendant, probably out of all of them, is the most subject to mood swings. So your moods can definitely wax and wane like the moon does. Like it grows and dissipates in light. And so there are times where you might find that you are more open and you are more welcoming of new experiences or new people. And there are times where you might be distant or closed off or detached. Now, sometimes this can operate in terms of physical sensations or things that are just really instinctual, because the first house also is connected with the physical body. And so this could definitely relate to like there are times where you're like really energetic and like bubbly and like you just wake up in a good mood, you don't know why. And then there are times where if you have this sense of like not being as open or being more distant or putting up the shell, you can feel feelings of lethargy or fogginess or problems concentrating. Those are certain things that could definitely crop up with this. So moving on, let's go ahead and talk about the sun, which the sun is in Pisces. So it's not connecting with the ascendant directly, but these are in the same element. So the sun is in a water sign, and then the ascendant's in a water sign. And the sun sign is sort of like this like core self. So the sun is like the center of the astrological chart. It's what everything else flows around. So even though it's sort of like the end note, or like the general primary expression is going to more autonomously lean towards this Aquarius, because as we mentioned, the sort of strength of air and strength of fixed energy, there is a need in terms of how you're mastering characteristics in this lifetime and how you're developing and maturing and evolving is centered around achieving more mutability. Okay, so we see that there's a need for you to learn to step into the mutable ways of life, and then to really remain grounded in this water expression. And we would say you have 3 points in water because you have the 1 point in ascendant, right? So the difficulty of becoming integrated and embodying the sun, the core energy of this chart, is going to be that mutable aspect, right? But to understand, some, characteristics of Pisces and the sun in Pisces. So Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. It's the last sign of the great circle. And one of the things that astrologers sort of did in terms of conceptualizing Pisces is that Aries has a very sort of like direct and very distinct like characterization. It's very easy to understand Aries because it's all very in your face. It's very transparent. Whereas Pisces energetically is a little bit more enigmatic of a sign, and it has traits and features of all the signs of the zodiac. So Pisces individuals are oftentimes misunderstood. That is one of the first things that we typically get with that particular enhancement of the chart. And I have the moon in Pisces. My moon's kind of sitting right here in your 9th house. And the 9th house is oftentimes like where you learn like higher knowledge, or where you learn, abstract views of the world. So kind of, I get a lot of people who have Pisces midheavens as clients. But when you have the sun in Pisces, again, this is a very receptive, right? Because it's mutable. It's a very receptive sign. and it's very gentle, and it is a sign that is easily influenced. It's the last sign of the zodiac. So Aries is the leader. It doesn't like, it only looks forward. It doesn't look back at all these signs, right? So like if we think of all these signs like walking in a line, Aries is head of the pack leading, and Pisces kind of takes up that caboose. And therefore Pisces sort of gets all of this energetic breadcrumbs from the other signs. So yeah, this particular sign can be influenced. Now you can convert this obviously because it's the sun and learn to be somebody who can influence. But for right now, that's like generally the core components here. And so oftentimes as you are developing into your mature adult self, you're actually supposed to lean into the natural purity and youthfulness, but also the incredible emotional insight and spiritual wisdom of Pisces. Because it's the last sign, it is also the sign that is further sort of detached from the mundane world. It's very much linked with spirit and the astral plane and like the intangible, right? So things like creativity and artistry and music and emotions and human understanding. These are all components that Pisces gets very interested in. So naturally, this sign does seek to express core characteristics of being quite mystical, artistic, musical, altruistic, charitable, compassionate, emotional, and imaginative, and seeks to have a rich inner life. So the goal ultimately with this is to, in some ways, allow for some of the more petty and some of the more superficial aspects of life to fall away as you become older, as you become wiser. So there's also a need to, in a lot of ways, be someone who is definitely at their core an empath. I would say Pisces is the most empathic sign of all the signs of the zodiac. The water signs are all going to be stronger in their empathy. Taurus is also pretty strong in its empathy because the moon is exalted in that sign. But that is something that you're typically going to see. So there's this ability to have great sympathy, sensitivity, and empathy to others. And there is definitely a strength in one's intuition. And again, sort of those gut instincts. So you're supposed to utilize your natural intuition, and or I don't want to say natural, because oftentimes the sun is not natural to us. We grow into our sun sign as we get older. So there's a need for you to develop sort of a core persona in which you are tolerant, forgiving, and non-judgmental. And you're going to utilize these within the house that it resides in. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. But typically, there is a goal for you to want to serve emotionally or spiritually in this lifetime to some degree. Now, depending again on not every person with their sun in Pisces is destined to be some like spiritual guru, right? But there is a need for them to intrinsically feel like they make the world a better place. They healed the world, or they bring some aspect of their unique and rich personal wisdom and impart that on the world in some way. So typically this is going to show at your core that you are probably leaning more towards being non-confrontational. You prefer to be a mediator or a little bit of a peacekeeper. And you might really pride yourself on being somebody who can do that because the sun is in a quite visible point in the chart. And some, energy components that you need to watch out for. Again, with Cancer, we talked about like mood swings or being very attached to a subjective view of the world. So leaning more into objectivity can sometimes help, with an enhancement like this. Or learning learning better emotional regulation can sometimes happen with this component as well. And then with the sun in Pisces, there can sometimes be a lot of resistance towards work or labor. This is a sign that really, really dislikes being uncomfortable, even more so than Cancer. Cancer is one of those signs. It's like, I can work. I'm a hard worker. I just need to feel comfortable in order to be able to step into a work environment I enjoy. or step into some kind of service or lend my assistance, right? And the sun in Pisces is also a sign where like it leans towards fantasy and the fantastical. So typically people with the sun in Pisces need to feel like their purpose in life, they are able to sort of build it in an idealistic way. And anything that doesn't kind of match that natural idealism, you can become very disenchanted with life. And we can see that some of the sun component links back to the 5th house, and the 5th house deals with pleasure and leisure. So I would say even doubly so with a chart like this, that you really want to kind of design a life that you really enjoy, right? Or a life in which you feel that sense of personal fulfillment. And there's a tendency to sometimes get lost in the clouds and get detached from your immediate, tangible, earthly surroundings. So that's what we have in terms of that sun placement and then the moon placement. So the moon is in Gemini and it's in the 12th house. So the moon rules your ascendant. So this is pretty important. So when the ruler of the ascendant is, in the 12th house, this can sometimes point to emotionally maybe needing a lot of time and space to yourself and a sense of isolation. The 12th house, again, is linked with the house of hidden things. So there is a solitary energy to 12th house activities. And there's also spiritual components to the 12th house. So things like meditation, things like trance work, things like solitary long-term projects, like a lot of creatives who are like artists, musicians, painters, have strong 12th houses because they have to take that time alone to like get into that creative space. And we see that you have Gemini. So Gemini is typically a sign. This is a dualistic sign. So it can express itself in, it has this sort of like dual expression to itself. And it's very much linked with the mind and intellect. So it's funny because a lot of how you present yourself is pretty emotional. Two of the most visible points of the chart are linked with water signs here. So that typically shows that you kind of wear your emotions on your sleeve, or you really put your emotions out there. But we can see that like behind the scenes, like you might be quite a thorough thinker, or you might be someone who really weighs on certain ideas heavily. Like you like to be thorough and take your time to think things through. The moon and the 12th house both have links to the unconscious and unconscious processing. So there can be aspects of your deepest self that you don't share with others. So like this could be that your internal monologue might be very different than the way in which you present yourself to the world or to others. So oftentimes people who have the moon in Gemini don't appear to be intensely emotional or sentimental. So this could also be sort of the first impression you give is quite emotional or sentimental, but deeper at more of the core of yourself, you're actually, maybe somebody who can be detached or cold or cynical at times, or someone who might question things and not just lean into the emotionality. So this tells me that you might first react or sense things through the emotion, and then you might take time to really kind of contemplate on things and separate your emotions from things that are happening to you. So this shows that you're not purely just an emotional person, that you have this ability to be objective, right? You have this ability to detach from that a little bit. I've noticed I have a lot of my best friends throughout my life have had moon in Gemini, and this is a very anxious sign typically for the moon to be in. Now, because it's in the 12th house, you may not be aware of, feelings of anxiety or worry that might plague you, or you might be aware of these, but you don't know consciously where they come from, because again, this is sort of linked with the unconscious. So there might be a tendency for you to worry or be anxious, because it's the role of your ascendant, of how you are perceived, right? Or you might be worried about stepping into the unknown, initiating, right? So this shows that there is an element of yourself where you really might want to hide yourself, or you might really not like to draw a lot of attention. And that can be difficult when a lot of the core energy of this chart is the sun right here on the midheaven in the 10th house, which is like, you need to be visible. You need to, you need to leave this impact on the world. You need to really kind of put yourself out there in the public, when there's a lot here that shows that you might be rather reserved or shy. You might feel more comfortable in intimate settings, right? With people that you know, versus being the face of something. So that's kind of a contrast or a difficulty that is coming up with this particular blend of big three. You really do require a lot of mental stimulation, and you really do feel closer to people or feel more understood when you can share your thoughts or when you can share your opinions. Moon and Gemini people love to learn, by the way. Like they really love to just absorb information. So you might be somebody that has a lot of knowledge or facts about many different things. And you just might be someone who maybe like enjoys reading or enjoys learning in some way. So you also might find with the moon in 12th that you don't like it when emotions get too intense in interpersonal situations. So you might have the tendency to withdraw yourself if you feel overexposed, or if you feel that the weight of interactions is becoming too much for you. So that's kind of like really kind of breaking down the big three. So one thing that we see is that when the moon is sort of in this type of condition, the moon links to our youth and early life. So the early life might have been more challenging because it's in one of the houses that is seen as more difficult to deal with, right? So there might be some elements here where you might feel like, maybe the circumstances of your upbringing were really challenging. And this can be linked to the third house here because it's square this Jupiter. This could be linked to the third house here, which deals with early life and deals with early life experiences. This particularly is talking about like amongst your peers. So this is talking about like grade school and adolescence, but it's also in the sign that rules the fourth house. So this can talk about family circumstances as well. So there might have been some sort of disruption in the early life in terms of family or displacement, right? The 12th house is like things that are lost or hidden. So there could have been displacement in the early life, or a segregation from the family or siblings. So sometimes that can be elements that happen. Again, in astrology, we always have to, everyone's experiences are impacted by the nature of the chart, but also aspects of nurture. So there will be some things I won't be privy to because we're not speaking directly in a consultation, but this is definitely, these are elements that can definitely crop up. Again, with that moon though, it can show that your own feelings and emotions can definitely be somewhat of an enigma to you at times. But you might find that emotionally you really want to take those feelings of discomfort in your own self, in your own identity, and you might seek to help other people who might feel disenfranchised or displaced or oppressed in some way. Like you might really identify with the underdog because you might feel like the underdog a little bit in your own life, right? So the early life circumstances are more complicated with a chart like this, but as you get into the adult life, when you are able to sort of like link this like sun and ascendant together in a more seamless way, you'll find that you can step into being more comfortable with yourself. It's not going to say that you won't deal with challenges of the moon, because of course you will, but you'll find that it will be a little bit easier. So this can also be a chart of someone who is a little bit of a late bloomer, right? Or like someone who really steps into themselves later in life. And we see this commonly when the planet distributions lean strongly towards the third quadrant or the fourth quadrant of the chart, which is what this chart shows. In fact, most of your planets are here, excuse me, above the horizon. So a lot of your life is externalized and a lot of life development happens later in life. So that is something that we see really commonly with charts like this. Okay. So, but yeah, yes. Okay. So yeah, definitely a natural spiritual inclination. You might have had that from when you were a really young age. And may have definitely experienced losses earlier in life. Okay. So going into the next section, part 2. So, all right, so we're going to talk about some other aspects of the chart, or some other house and planet placements in the chart. So, and we will come back to the aspects of the moon and sun and the ascendant here in a little bit. So let's go ahead and talk about some other things. So one of the first other areas that we can talk about is your Mercury in Aries. So this is really interesting because this is your only planet in a fire sign, but this planet also is not linked with any other placement. Now you'll see this K down here. This is a comet. It is not a planet, so we don't count that. And that's why there's no line drawn towards it. So the only interaction this planet is getting is what we call a in conjunction with Jupiter. So that is not, it's an aspect, it's sort of like representing how much of a non-aspect it is. It means that these two planets are really misaligned, like they don't understand each other. But just talking about having Mercury in Aries, so this Mercury is oftentimes going to be linked with the ways in which one communicates, the ways in which one processes their thoughts, and how you share your ideas with others. It also deals with comprehension. So like how you learn things, like, or how you are, how things are revealed to you, and then your initial sort of receptivity to that, right? So when you have your Mercury in Aries, this can show that, while you might be someone who can be reserved and, pensive and really think on things, and you might be someone who's quite shy or timid at first, you have this ability to really kind of feel bolder, or feel like you have more, you give yourself permission to speak directly when you feel you are knowledgeable of said thing, right? So you can be outspoken and direct, and you might find yourself eager to express your ideas and opinions. And there can be, typically the way of communication of a Mercury and Aries person is like this is a very impulsive sign typically. Again, it's a cardinal fire sign, so it just sort of does things like the strike of a match, right? Is how you can think of it with Aries. So you might at times think, you might sort of be someone who thinks very quickly or processes information quickly, or you might be somebody who can be very outspoken and might have difficulties communicating in a tactful way, or communicating in a way in which you don't draw in some opposition or some resistance to the way in which you are communicating. And this might be something that you have sort of picked up on from a young age or learned, and that might cause you to lean more into this Cancer ascendant, whereas you might say, well, I'm going to kind of read the room. I'm going to kind of feel the energy of people. I don't want to be the first to speak because I'm afraid that I might, once I put it out there and it's it falls upon ears, it's kind of hard to take it back and retract it. So you might have sort of learned that this is a disposition that happens to you. And so you might find you really kind of let other people speak and get a sense of their energy, and then maybe sort of flit to people that have characteristics that are common with people that typically like your way of speaking or enjoy your company. But oftentimes a lot of what the Aries people who have Mercury in Aries, there is usually something novel or fresh, or there is a stamp of originality with these people. And because it's in the 10th house, this can be because you are driven to contribute in some way, or you're driven to impart practical advice to others. So there is usually an enthusiasm to speak up if you feel it's going to be useful or pave or open new paths for you. Now, typically, Mercury in Aries also is very aligned with newness and novelty. And that's actually similar to the moon in Gemini. Like they love new things. That's why I mentioned the idea, like typically moon in Gemini people love to learn. And so there could be an aspect with more of this internal moon here where you really find that you are versatile or have many different interests, and you're always looking for that interest or that fascination or that hobby that will lead to some sort of converted results for you. So like you might find that you don't want to waste your time on things that don't serve you or don't have a good outcome or don't serve other people. So you will move on to new ideas and projects rather quickly with a placement like this. And that might be the contrast with this in conjunction with Jupiter, is like a difficulty in prioritizing what to focus on. But you can be very, very honest and very decisive. So, and this might come like over time as you learn how to blend. There's technically a sextile here between this Mercury and this moon sign here. It's a little wide. I use very small orbs, but it is there. So that definitely can be something that you notice, is that like in time as you've learned to like really think things through, as you're introduced to information and then speak on them or then present your idea, you might find that you're able to overcome some of what can sometimes be the downsides of having Mercury in Aries. But this definitely also shows that you have the stamp of advocacy in your chart. So you have the ability to speak up for others. And through that, you actually speak for yourself. So that might be the way in which you are choosing to utilize this Mercury in Aries later in life. But early in life, you might find that you had difficulty like honing how to really kind of present this energy in a way that was going to be beneficial for you. You've also, this also shows that a lot of how you think, or like a lot of maybe what influenced your upbringing. So Mercury it rules this Virgo down here. So it's ruling this Jupiter, and it rules the fourth as well. So a lot of your early life or family life might have been, and we'll talk about this, when we get back to the accesses point. But a lot of your early life might have been your parents or your guardians or siblings influencing you by focusing a lot on what you're going to do when you grow up or what you're going to grow up to be. So a lot of how you think or a lot of how you focus on information or communication might be for the benefit of your public image or for the benefit of, okay, what sort of skills or what sort of knowledge can I develop that will help me in my career? So sometimes this can show someone who is career focused. We also get this with the sun conjunct the midheaven in the 10th. It's like the core self. There's a lot of what the energy of this chart is surrounding is this drive or eventuality, when you lean into the astrology, of becoming a leader or becoming somebody of importance within your career and your occupation. So Mercury is lending a hand with that as well. Okay. Also, a lot of the ways you speak or a lot of your opinions might be influenced by the family as well. We see that with this Mercury being the Lord of the fourth is what we would call it. Okay, so we talked about the sun, the moon, Mercury. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about Venus. Okay, so Venus is here in the 9th house, and the 9th house is all about higher learning, spirituality, theology, philosophy. So very abstract thinking is oftentimes linked with the 9th house. It's one of the houses of knowledge. So we can see that there is a cerebral aspect to your Venus, and then Venus being in an Aquarius, an air sign, is sort of doubling that meaning. So when someone has Venus in Aquarius, this shows that oftentimes in relationships or your aesthetics or desires strongly lean towards more unconventional or unique or eccentric interests in relationships, and pleasures or like personal rewards, right? So again, Venus is going to be linked to one's finances typically, or again, that sense of reward, aesthetics, what you have affinities for. Like this can also talk about like your general interests. That kind of links up with Mercury as well, but it's also going to deal with interpersonal relationships. This can be romantic or platonic. So Venus is just generally the planet of beauty and harmony. So it typically is like how you desire to harmonize in life. So air signs are quite sociable and quite intellectual, but they really struggle with emotions, right? They do struggle with these placements tend to be more objective than subjective. So that creates an interesting dichotomy in that a lot of how you present yourself is through these water signs that are quite sensitive and deep. But once you sort of get into this realm of relationships, you might intellectualize your interests, or you might intellectualize your relationship dynamics rather than fully feel dynamics in relationships. This might be linked back to the moon in Gemini. This sort of like, this sort of oscillation between being very immersed in relationship dynamics and then subsequently detaching and sort of floating above it and like depersonalizing it. So this is very much linked, right? These things tend to be linked to one another because they're in the same element. So friendship tends to be very important for Venus and Aquarius people, more so to a degree than like romance. Now that's not to say that, people won't have like inclinations to find a life partner. It just might be that they really strive for connections that have a basis that is strongly platonic. So that's kind of one thing we can see there. So even when you're in a romantic relationship, you might feel like there needs to be a really strong basis of compatibility, platonic compatibility there. Typically, you really desire people who are ready to go toe to toe with you to talk about like any sort of topic, and you really are looking for someone where you can have like long conversations, like deep conversations. So we also get the sense that, when it comes to outside of like your career or work or like sort of like your objectives, like when you get into it, there is a lot of this energy that leans towards resisting things that are superficial or surface level in nature. Like you're looking for something deeper in life, typically with your social engagements and your romantic partner, and rewards in life, right? You may not mind small talk, you may not mind keeping things surface level, but for you, once you're comfortable and able to open up with someone, like you can just really like have a lot to say. And you probably don't mind, going to the toe to toe and arguing or like debating things, right? I don't want to say arguing, like more like debating. Like you might really enjoy like a good quarrel or a good challenge. And a lot of people have like ninth house emphasis are really good at playing devil's advocate. Like they just have this way of being able to, present a lot of hypothetical situations and then like really want to discuss those at length. So you might get some enjoyment out of that. You might find that you're very interested in other religions and cultures. Like you might see yourself as cultured or worldly, even if you haven't traveled or haven't like gone to other places, right? There is usually a rejection of tradition with placements like this as well. So you might find that you don't really resign yourself to conventionality, or you might want to like sort of march to the beat of your own drum in social situations or with your interests. So you might be interested in things that other people around you aren't interested in, or you might find that you try to have this good balance between, okay, this is what the world says is like conventional or what should be done. I want to strike a balance with that, with what I personally like and desire. So that might be, some elements of, this Venus in the ninth house as well, and this Venus in Gemini. But yeah, this can be, there's a lot of charm with this placement. There is a draw to the unusual. This is typically a pretty tolerant Venus placement as well. Like, you are somebody who, you might, Aquarius people are weird. They can subsequently like a lot of people, and then they can hate a lot of people at the same time. I just find that there's this weird sort of detachment there with them. They can become very jaded if they're impacted by a lot of negative circumstances early in life. But this can show that you're really open to different people, and you're more drawn into people who are interesting, people who are new, something you haven't seen before. So you might really despise outplayed tropes or things that are overhyped, right? Or people who are caricatures, walking caricatures that lack depth. You might really despise that type of energy. This is also a very loyal placement though. So a lot of people I hear out in the world that Aquariuses are the Aquarius energy is horrible in terms of relationships because of that tendency for them to emotionally detach and ghost things, or that tendency again to march to the beat of their own drum. But I find that any fixed sign is going to show a lot of loyalty in relationships. And so when you feel like you kind of met people who are compatible with you, you are an incredibly, incredibly loyal friend. But you do need a certain amount of personal freedom to pursue your interests and to align with your value system. So if anybody will infringe on that, that is going to be a pretty big deal breaker for Venus. Venus being in the night, in Aquarius in the ninth house. Okay, so going on to talk about Mars, and I'll start to move a little bit quicker so that we don't run out of time. So we have Mars and Saturn in Aquarius. So Mars in Aquarius, again, is also going to be very socially oriented and really strives to work in teamwork or collaborative efforts with others. It is in the 8th house, and the 8th house is a house of secrecy or intimacy or privacy. So you may not love working in big groups. You might enjoy smaller environments. You might feel more comfortable with that. So sometimes people with charts like this seek one or two really good friends that they typically are really supportive, people you can call upon for anything. And especially Moon and Gemini people, they tend to really lean towards words of affirmation or quality time love languages, where they can call their friend and be like, I just need to bounce these ideas off you because I've been ruminating on this and I feel like I'm in paralysis right now because I don't know what to do. And I feel like there is some glitch in the way I'm processing things. I feel like I'm not being rational. Can you weigh in on this? And so that is typically energy that you find to be very helpful. But you really would prefer, or, you might find that you enjoy, so long as it's not, hyper visible, you're not hyper visible in this role. You might enjoy being active in a community, or you might really enjoy working towards a common goal with other people. So this can be, you might enjoy, because Saturn deals with duty and responsibility. So you might really enjoy taking on, responsibilities to others, if you feel like you are on the same page, right? Or if you feel like you align in your ideas or your values. Obviously, Aquarius is also very aligned with breaking down traditions and opposing things like corruption. So these people have a strong streak of justice typically. So you might find that you don't feel the need to infringe upon other people's freedoms or rights with this. So Mars is typically how you act or how you pursue things. So obviously you're going to be someone who pursues a lot of your own personal goals and ambitions, but you prefer to do this with others. And you want to do this in a way where you are, if you're going to be in a leadership role, you're doing it in a way that's fair and somewhat impartial. So you don't really want to emotionally infringe on other people. You might find that you have a lot of ingenuity in how you do things. There might be a way in which how you you might be very good at streamlining things or like finding improvements in ways of doing things. And this comes from a lot of the stem of this comes from this moon in Gemini, the ability to kind of really think and process things and say, there's a better way we could be doing this. Like I'm driving the scenario of doing things as it's been done, and then I'm coming up with all these variables in which we can do it that could be better. And that's because the sign of Aquarius is seeking to improve upon, or is seeking to like push efficiency in the world. And so that might be something that's like a little hidden skill or trait that you have. And so you value fairness and justice in the world. And again, you might have this unique way of doing things. And in a way, because it's in the 8th house, you also may not be conscious of like how you come up with these ideas, or like, you know, you may not even perceive it yourself as being unique, because the 8th house is quincunx or in conjunct the ascendant. So like you may not identify that you have this, and that's a difficulty for people who have planets in the 6th house and people have planets in the 8th house. Is like they may not realize some of these components about themselves. And also the 12th house, these might be things you don't realize you own or possess. One thing though, because you have two what we call malefic planets in the 8th house, you may definitely have faced your fair share of challenges. Now, because your strongest planet is in the 8th house, you actually evolve through challenge. So in some ways, you should embrace the challenging placements in your chart, because they help to develop you into a stronger, more resilient individual. So you definitely might find that you face a lot of setbacks, and this might be why you're driven to work with other people, because when, again, as I mentioned, the ascendant is sort of like the means in which one funnels their energy of the chart, like it funnels through the ascendant. So you might find that when you try to initiate things on your own, like you're not as successful. You might find that there's strength in numbers. So you might find you face too many challenges doing things, you know, on your own time or dime. So you might find you really enjoy working in partnership or small groups with other people. But because the Saturn is here too, which we'll get to this with the purpose of the Saturn return, this can show where you feel the most duty or responsibility in life, but this can also show where you feel the most limited or challenged. So it could be that once you sort of, you know, became wise to this type of dynamic in your chart, you might have found that initially you're like, well, I'll just lean towards working with other people a lot. But you can't always determine at face value who are people that you can have this 8th house style relationship with and who aren't. So you might have been burned a few times in these pursuits of collaborating with other people, and that might have led you towards being very cautious about letting people in, right? That might have led you towards resisting being vulnerable and intimate with other people. So that can be a difficult dynamic to work with, because with an ascendant like this, with the ruler in the 12th, you might at times feel invisible or misunderstood. Like you might feel like people don't see like your strengths, or like people may not see that like how you can be purposeful or helpful, right? Even though I would say that in some ways, you know, objectively, we kind of can see that's not true with the sun up here, but you might feel on a personal level, like you might feel like that people understand parts of you, but maybe not all of you, right? And so maybe you prefer to work more in these like quieter, less visible circumstances, because there is this sense of like, you know, not being understood. But then when you do bring people in, sometimes you're going to face challenges in those dynamics as well. So, that is definitely something to be aware of. This also shows you're deeply intense and passionate. And this is probably something that people don't pick up on at face value with this Cancer ascendant. But there's a ton of drive with someone like, and my husband has these placements too. He has like a gentler ascendant, but then he has like Mars, Saturn in the 8th. And that's totally true for him. Like he's just incredibly, incredibly driven, and like, I've never seen a more determined person than him. He is incredible. So I know you probably have that component to you as well. Okay, so you have Jupiter in Virgo. So that's linking here in the 3rd house. So this is the house of early learning. And Virgo is a mutable earth sign. So again, this is mutable signs tend to be really good with playing support roles, or they're very utilitarian. Like they like to utilize resources, or they like to come in and sort of like put their stamp or sparkle or finesse on something, or like they kind of like to work in the end stages of a project typically, and that's because mutable signs end the seasons. So for example, we're in the middle of Sagittarius season, and then right before Christmas, we're going to move into Capricorn season, and that's the start of a new season. This is the start of winter, right? So this is the end of fall, technically, which is interesting to think that right before Christmas, we're only ending fall. So with your Jupiter in Virgo, you definitely have the ability to think things through clearly. Okay, so we kind of see some of this connection with the moon in Gemini. Sometimes this can be to your detriment, okay? So like sometimes you can almost think too much on things, but you have the ability to analyze and understand even small details, and you have a highly developed intellect, or you have the ability to have a highly developed intellect. There can be you might really enjoy simplicity of learning or understanding things. So you have the ability to learn a lot, but also be able to simplify a lot of the things you learn. So this can be the stamp of someone who's a really good teacher, or like a really good counselor. Like you have a way of taking something complicated and being able to explain it in a way that's like just more simplified. And I'm linking that back to that Mercury as well, the Mercury in Aries. Like you have this ability. It might be difficult for you to learn how to convert it in a way that like to be able to reach other people with it, but that trait is definitely there. Again, Jupiter in 3rd house can show there's a great love for learning and an eagerness in natural inquisition and curiosity that's inherent in people. So I have this placement too. It's in a different sign, but I have Jupiter in the 3rd, and I love to learn. Like I am constantly reading. I'm constantly like trying to learn something new. I'm constantly taking like a new class or trying to learn a new skill. It's very common for people with Jupiter in the 3rd. And these people are natural counselors or natural therapists of life. So even if you don't go on to pursue psychology or a humanities or social science, a lot of people with these placements tend to have that type of disposition to themselves. So again, in Jupiter on its baseline is a planet that talks a lot about how one desires to expand and grow, or the area where they can be the most blessed. So you can be the most blessed when you open yourself up to learning new things, and you continually strive to self-educate. And also you can have a wonderful ability or skill to communicate. Now typically, because this is early learning, it's like disseminating information, or like you have the wonderful ability to teach new concepts to people. When we get to the soulmate portion, this Jupiter also represents where your spouse rewards you in life. So like where they really open up rewards. Now this is important for people who have Jupiter retrograde. Okay, so you got a retrograde Jupiter. That and your Pluto are retrograde, but Pluto was retrograde for a ton of people during this time. So, but this Jupiter retrograde does matter, and it is important. So I notice, just for me and a couple other people who have this, is that this Jupiter, when Jupiter is retrograde, it's harder to feel like you can harness the benefits of the planet. And this oftentimes is linked more to the early life. So the circumstances of wherever Jupiter is placed in someone's chart when it's retrograde can show in early life you had a harder time in this area, or the rewards came through hard work. Like they weren't like things that just happened naturally or organically. But this can also be that like there is a sense that you feel unlucky at times, or the sense that like there can be usually like a cost to like any sort of prosperity or abundance you get. I found that once I met my partner that I felt less like of a struggle with my Jupiter in the 3rd than I did before I got married. But that could also just be an age thing. Like as you get older, you're able to tap into that a little bit more. Now, luckily, this Jupiter doesn't rule like any like it rules the 10th house. So that's probably like the area, the career might develop a little later, or might take some time for you to kind of get your feet under you in terms of the career, because that Jupiter is retrograde. But generally speaking, you have a strong propensity to have a strong career or public life. Okay, Saturn in Aquarius, we kind of talked about that a little bit. This can show that, again, you might tend to have a mistrust for things that are done traditionally. Now that can stem from a bunch of different reasons. So for everyone I've met with Saturn in Aquarius, it's all kind of like, it's been linked to like one thing or another. It can be linked to like the parents. Typically it's linked to the parents, like the parents, one or both of the parents were like really conservative or traditional, or they kind of went like, oh, because I said so type of parenting. And so that feeling of injustice or that feeling of being infringed upon causes that person generally to be wary of things that are presented as too conventional, right? Because Aquarius energy enjoys the unconventional. But there is there is a need for you to, in some ways, lay some of that energy down, like to sort of detach a little bit from that type of inclination or that type of thinking, because it does close you off from certain opportunities. And that's coming from Saturn, the sort of like quincunx the ascendant, right? So that can be an energy that sometimes gets you into trouble if you lean into it too much. Saturn in the 8th house can talk about fear of the unknown, or fear of, fear of change. So we kind of talked about that as well with the Cancer ascendant. There can be a fear of stepping into things that are uncomfortable or not familiar to you. So then we also see, like, when Saturn's in Aquarius, even though you might align with the unconventional, you might fear doing that openly. You might fear judgment that you get, or you might fear the ramifications of that. So transitions are something that you don't feel a sense of excitement for changes. You do feel this sense of wariness or suspicion. So what it really comes down to is like learning how you can be a leader in creating social constructs and aligning with others, despite the fact that they might have elements of them that are more conventional, right? And learning to share some of your unconventionality and to be able to teach and impart wisdom on others in that way, but also learning to embrace other people and where they're at, right? And learning that not all things conventional are necessarily bad. Okay, and then you have some of these outer planets here. So you've got Uranus in Capricorn, you've got Neptune in Capricorn, and then you've got Pluto in Scorpio. So the signs don't matter as much for these, but the house placements do matter. So you have Uranus and Neptune in the 7th house. So this is the house of relationships, the house of marriage, the house of unity and partnership. It's typically just called the house of other. And this is also an energy that you find that you do not possess, or these are characteristics that you prefer for others to bring into your life rather than you harnessing and enhancing yourself. It's very interesting of a topic once we start thinking about the fact that your North Node is in that sign as well in the 7th house. So a lot of your life purpose is meant to lean into some of this energy some more, and developing behaviors that are very Capricorn in terms of partnership and unity. So there is a need to align with conventional, right? Or there is a need to, in some ways be more, this could be like learning to be more agreeable. I don't know. That's not meant to be offensive. My moon in Pisces is like, you can't say that. Oh my gosh, you can't say that. You're going to offend people. And then like my sun in Sagittarius is like, let's just say it how it is, right? So like that's typically, this is the argument that goes on in my mind. But so this shows that, again, you need a lot of freedom in relationships. Now, I think, relationships is probably where you may have the most amount of conventionality. to where like you prefer relationships that maybe are like monogamous. You might want a long-term relationship, right? That's what that Capricorn energy typically gives. But you have certain like desires within a relationship where you want a relationship to be exciting. You want to experience some novelty in a relationship. You want to, again, explore different types of dating and interactions or partnerships, because this can be professional partnerships as well, or what you strive to do with your partner, even if the relationship itself is pretty conventional on the outside. A lot of what you strive to do together, or a lot of your shared ideals can be unconventional in nature, right? So you don't like to be restricted in relationships or feel, again, like you have a ball and chain in any kind of partnership. You do want to feel that sense that you can be in control. And so that is a component that we'll definitely talk about in terms of the life partner and the soulmate. And then you have your Neptune here as well. So this shows, even though it's in the sign of Capricorn, which is pretty serious and somber of a placement, and it's a little bit of a rigid, again, not super emotional or idealistic sign, it's still Neptune. So Neptune expresses itself in an idealistic way. It does prefer the fantasy, the romance. There can be a sense of like you have certain expectations in partnerships that you hope are going to be fulfilled. And these two planets, this Uranus and Neptune, are linked back to that Saturn in the 8th house. So this can show that you want someone that you feel truly understands you and you can be very intimate and vulnerable with. So like that's a lot of the yearning desire in terms of a marriage partner or just anyone you're going to be in a really close relationship with. You have to feel like you can trust them enough to sort of let them see more of these like unconventional parts of you, or to feel like you won't be judged by them. So you might have like a fear of judgment or a fear of rejection with this placement. So you kind of might dream or aspire to have a partner who is devoted and, compassionate, and someone who wants to sort of provide you a certain type of lifestyle, or somebody who really wants to protect you or open and pave new avenues for you, because we're thinking about Capricorn, which is like the ascender, like somebody who looks to ascend to like to great heights in life. So you might really aspire to have a partner like that. Like when relationships start to get hard, right? Like when things start to get difficult, this Neptune really dislikes, when that sort of like interpersonal conflicts or complications. And that kind of links back again with this sort of moon, right? Like you might really draw within yourself when you start to feel a lot of pressure in relationships, or you start to feel like you're being criticized. Like you might place a lot of that emotional burden on yourself. And maybe you are somewhat aware of this. So you're seeking somebody who is open and non-judgmental and go with the flow and, energetic, and it doesn't want to doesn't really want to, be super tethered to like the realities of the world. You want someone who's good with those aspects, but you don't want that energy to be what becomes infused in your relationship. And then you have Pluto and Scorpio in the 5th house. So when you have Pluto in the 5th house, this can show a really powerful creator, somebody who is incredibly artistic, and dramatic, and someone who has a lot of power to influence when they begin to show their authentic self. So that's the first thing that Pluto in the 5th house can do. Pluto in the 5th house can also show somebody who becomes very intensely attached in romantic situations. So you might find that you feel very compelled towards a romantic partner. So in love and romance, you become incredibly impassioned. So this can actually show for this Venus here, right? Because you have this house of marriage and unity ruled by Saturn. And then you have this Pluto in the 5th, which could show like very determined, very serious in love and relationships, and like, you know, is looking for like the one. But then when it comes to like friendship or your other relationships, you could be very detached, and like you can go for like a year without talking to somebody, and then when you talk to them again, it's like you talk as if like no time has passed at all, right? So you probably have both of those capacities. But in a relationship where you are being open and more vulnerable with somebody, and it's not just shared interest, you feel the need to like maybe like pin it down and make it something serious, or you feel the need to feel like that person is going to commit to you and be loyal to you, because you in turn become very enmeshed in these types of dynamics. So you really tap into your power, because Pluto is power for me. You really tap into your power when you find forms of outlets or release that are creative or linked with self-expression. So this can be, you know, performance. This can be competition in sports. This can be connecting in childlike whimsy, or connecting with youth and children. This can be, you know, other games, like some people like really enjoy intellectual games, like tabletop games. Like there's lots of things. Like typically the 5th house is linked with pleasure though. This could be, you know, a sense of you know, projecting some of yourself and who you are into your creative works as well. So a lot of writers can have like strong 5th house components. And you might find that you might be very, like, you might have a lot of strong ideals in terms of your children, because the 5th house is also the house of children. So that's talking a lot about like your inherent natal chart and its energy. So we've reached over the hour point, but I find that I want to keep moving it, because I do want to talk about aspects, and I do want to talk about some of the transits. So we might just go over here a little bit. Okay, so aspects. So let's go back to some of these original aspects. And I have notes off to the side, so if you hear like the mouse zoom button, that's just kind of what's happening there. Okay. Okay, so you have your sun in the 10th house. We talked about that. So that shows the core of this energy, and a lot of your core purpose is creating a stage in which you can stand upon that is environmentally set on the stage of career, public life, and image. So there's a strong desire to be influential in the world. And because it's being expressed through Pisces, this is a strong stamp of maybe seeking to impart wisdom on others, or seeking to be a pillar of compassion and altruism, or being somebody who's known for their empathy and the ability to understand the deeper psychological workings or desires of others, the ability to shine a light and illuminate areas of life that are either not talked about, or like that are repressed and hidden from society, or demographics that are neglected and infringed upon. So there can be a strong humanitarian nature to this chart, especially with the Aquarius Pisces. That's a very, very strong component that I typically see. So again, we have the sun here in the 10th house, and then it's trine this Pluto in the 5th house. So this can be that you have great abilities to ascend in power and influence. So basically, anytime Pluto connects with a planet, whether in a harmonious way, in a flowing aspect like a trine, which is what we're dealing with right now, or in an opposition or a square, which are like more of these red lines, which we'll talk about in a minute, this can show that you're basically supercharging the personal faster planet with the powers of Pluto. So basically, the key to unlocking the ability to step into the sun in the 10th house is by expressing your creative self, or expressing yourself through what brings you passion and joy. So, you know, if we were sitting and having a career reading, this would be one of those moments where I would say, yeah, Sally, you really need to go into a career that is of your own own making, your own dreams. Like, you need to link with what the dream is. You need to link with what the passion in life is. And this is likely something you found in adolescence. This is probably something that you had some reveal of, because Jupiter is in the third. You had like some revelation of it all the way in grade school, but probably once you got into like late teenage years is probably when that passion became known to you, or when that light bulb went off for you. Because I'm thinking about if we're progressing the houses, the fifth house is sort of like end teenage years, like early adult years. So there's probably something there, right, that kind of is infusing the power of the sun. Now, again, Pluto is facing some challenges in this chart, so this may not be something that you've leaned into yet, or something that you may be nervous to lean into, which we'll talk about Pluto square Mars here in a minute. So this shows that you do have a lot of resiliency and stamina. So typically, despite the fact that the sun in Pisces tends to be the most lethargic, placement, one of the more lethargic places for the sun to be in, you do have the power to continually propel yourself when it's something you're inspired by. You have a ton of will and zeal, and you probably have some creative finesse too. So you have this ability to just like really inspire and awe people if you tap into this energy. You are very likely, once you feel comfortable in yourself and you lean into the purpose of your sun, you will begin to live more in a sense where you're unapologetic, because you really sort of tapped into that energetic pillar that makes you happy. So some of the resistances of Saturn, or the tendency to want to hide yourself with the moon, you feel more comfortable being visible when you're being visible for what you contribute. You don't feel that comfortable being visible just as far as like people scrutinizing your identity and who you are and like how you behave. You want people to assess you based on, look what I can do, right? Or like, look how far I've come, versus like, assess who I am, right? So like, there's a difference in the visibility factor between, this area of the chart of the midheaven versus this area of the chart, the ascendant. So you also have the sun is sextile Uranus and Neptune. So we have sextiles here, right? Now what's interesting is that all aspects have what we call applying and separating conditions. So applying conditions means that they build in intensity, but it also means they're not as present earlier in life. So that is what's happening with the Pluto and Sun. It becomes more present the more you age. Whereas the separating is like, you have these components typically from a very young age, and you don't need to rely on their benefits, or their challenges don't challenge you as much as you get older. So here you have some separating sextiles. So sextiles present opportunity for alignment, whereas trines are like allyship and support flow, and it's typically unconscious. It's like an autonomous thing. It's not something you necessarily have to like consciously tap into. It'll sort of autonomously be activated whenever you achieve the balance that the connection holds. Whereas you have opportunities to bring these energetic components into your greater purpose, right? So with the sun sextile Uranus, it shows that a lot of your alignments with unconventionality, and a lot of your alignments towards the ability to understand others' expectations, your desire for freedom and your desire for discovery are great benefits that can propel you in your career and your public life and your personal, your life purpose. Neptune is showing that you also, again, can lean into your ability to idealize and create, your desire to create something beautiful, and this ability to have this strong sense of intuition. There are lots of opportunities in life where that will be presented in a way in which you can inspire yourself to continue moving forward. Now, some of these developments might also show that some of these insights come from other people because it's in the house of other. So you might find that you can get a second wind when you're inspired by somebody in your life, or you might find that other people in your life act as your muse. Like you are just having an interaction with them, and then like you're struck with the light bulb, right? And like off you go to create, right? So that helps to balance out the natural perspective in which you view the world through this, filter of subjectivity. So that's really cool. So talking about the moon, so this one's pretty important. So you have the moon square Jupiter. Now, out of all the squares, this one is probably one of the easier ones to deal with. But this shows that generally there's a tendency for your emotions to expand upon themselves. So like when you're in an emotional state, they can become quite pervasive and become quite inflamed. So that has a benefit and a downside. So like when you're happy, you can feel really, really happy. And then when you're feeling more downtrodden or sad, you can really sort of feel that type of energy. But typically your disposition is going to be warm and friendly because the moon really seeks to connect with others in a way that's deep, like on a soul level. And then Jupiter is a benevolent, jolly planet, right? So it tends to be optimistic and idealistic. So you might find that you have emotional generosity, and this can sometimes get you into trouble where you might actually burn yourself out emotionally by giving too much of yourself to other people. This probably happens in terms of advice. So like I said, this tends to be someone who's a natural counselor. I have a trine between these planets, so I actually feel a strong sense of emotional reward when I enter into this behavior exchange. Like I love being that person that people come to for advice. Like I just love that feeling. It just really just enlivens me. But Jupiter's a super important planet in my chart. It rules my sun and my moon. It rules just your sun here. But with the square, you might find that you resent it sometimes. And so that's something that you might definitely have to kind of just like watch out for, be aware of. But there's a tendency for you to be charitable and incredibly forgiving. So again, there is a tendency with this for people to be overly sacrificial in their own needs and desires. And that is difficult. It's a difficult thing to deal with. There's also an ability with the moon in the 12th, right? And then Jupiter in the 3rd, is that you really might be so good at being either repressing the emotions, or B, you might be so unaware of your emotions at times that it doesn't seep into how you communicate. So you probably have this ability to keep on keeping on, like business as usual, even if like you're dealing with some stuff emotionally. So you might have this way of being able to like, how you're communicating or connecting with others in terms of like verbally, you might be able to just kind of keep it about them. But what a lot of people don't know about astrology if they're first learning is that the planet that rules their ascendant, if it's in the 12th house, the planets in the 12th house are hidden to the individual native holder, but they're visible to other people, which is really interesting. So one thing that people might have said about you is that you might have this ability to like continue talking as if things are normal, or like continually focus on other people's needs, but like your face, you might be a little bit of an open book where like you feel like you're hiding like your emotions, but like other people are like, what's wrong? And you're like, nothing's wrong, I'm fine, right? And like you may not even be conscious something's wrong. You're like, I'm totally cool. And like, no, you're making that face that you make when you're upset. What's wrong, right? Like, so I've heard people have that. It depends, on the condition of how you relate to it, with it being in Gemini especially. But I find that is a commonality that I've seen, is like you really try to like withhold your own needs and desires, but people probably can pick up on them and they might inquire about them or go, oh, like, hey, what's going on, right? So So, okay, let me see. It's taking my notes. Okay, so we have a loose, so Venus square Pluto. Again, we kind of talked about this. It really does talk about like in romantic relationships specifically, you have very intense like emotional responses. So again, in friendships, you might be a little bit more, and this Pluto might seep over into friendships. Like you might get jealous if a really close friend starts hanging out with someone else. So you might find like, you have an ability again to oscillate or flit. There's like I call it like a natural like what would you call it? It's like sort of this natural contradiction in the chart where like there are a lot of times where you can just be like, go with the flow, hey, don't worry about it, everything's cool, I'm super mellow, let's just chill, want to do something exciting, like, and just very like, yeah, let's just hang, let's just, we don't got to make a big plan about it, we can just kind of just chill and hang out. Although you have the ability to be a planner, right, with Jupiter in the third, and then you got Mercury in Aries, so like you have that ability, absolutely. But you might be a little bit more like, either we're just going to hang out and be mellow, or we're going to come up with like this big grand adventure, right? Because in the ninth house is linked with adventure. But with this Pluto square, you might find that you might feel like you come off a little bit needy, or you feel like you have like very, very strong desires within relationships. And like I said, this tends to lead towards romance. Again, my brother-in-law has like a similar component in his chart. And he doesn't come off this way just in my interactions with him, but in relationships, like there's this intense sort of like reaction he can have in relationships with a partner. And so that is something that definitely might come out. So, your love life is likely to be passionate and tumultuous at times. So you have to be mindful of things like jealousy, power struggles, and possessiveness. Because these can become conflicts in relationships for you. And you might draw in at times, like in these relationships, sometimes you might forgo your own values or forgo like certain institutions you've built within yourself for the partner. So that's something that you have to like be mindful of too, because you'll find that you'll resent these partners in time. Now, one of the ways to overcome this is to just link up with the actual right soulmate match. That's the difference, right? Because we really this Venus doesn't become as big of a component when we are understanding the soulmate archetype and we're leaning into how to find that person and how to seek that type of disposition out, so that this does not activate quite to that degree, right? But so yeah, in your dating life, you might definitely have had some interesting stories, right? And this is what we would call a square. So square means like friction or challenge. Like there is an enemy in these planets. Like they're adversarials to each other. They don't get along. They don't like each other. So with Mars, Mars is the stronger of the two in terms of, the squares here. And where did my notes go for Mars? They just like disappeared. That's weird. Okay, hold on. It's okay. I don't need the notes. I like to have them, but they're not something I need. So talking about Mars square Pluto. So again, this Mars is more of like how we take action, our willpower, but it's also like how we react to things. So you might find that it's difficult for you to it's difficult when you have these strong like creative inspirations and downloads. It might be difficult for you to know how to actually act upon those or how to enact those into some sort of action or plan. Or you might find that if you are feeling this strong sense of intensity emotionally or within yourself and how you're expressing yourself, you might find you can't act naturally. Like you might find you freeze up sometimes, like with this particular dynamic, if that makes sense. So the fifth house is also the house of desires. So like when you really desire something, you might become very impulsive or compulsive in certain behaviors. So again, the 8th and 5th houses are relationship houses. They're intimacy houses. So this likely comes out primarily in relationships. But it is possible that this also comes out just in terms of like pursuing creative projects, or when you're working in collaborative settings with others, or like if you're in an environment where it's meant to be fun, or you're doing something leisurely. If there is an interaction in which you feel challenged, you might find that you react harshly. Like you might find that it's just something that kind of comes out, or you might find you build feelings of resentment, because again, the Mars is in the 8th house, so there is a tendency to sometimes be passive aggressive with that, or there's a tendency to like not be straight up or straightforward. Depends on the person. So you might find with this placement that you do in certain circumstances have the tendency to react with a great amount of intensity in certain situations, and that is something that you might really kind of struggle to control, because Saturn's here too, right? So it's like you may find at times like you really try to rein that in and not like expose that vulnerability, and then you might find that vulnerability seeps out into certain behaviors, and this might be with the moon in the 12th. Like you find ways to cope with intense emotions by withdrawing, or by finding like some sort of vice to do that kind of like helps to ease the discomfort. So that's just something to think about in terms of, maybe identifying if that's true for you. It may not be true for you. You may not identify with it, which is totally fine. But if it is true for you, what is that thing? And, ideally, how could you overcome that? So this is presenting one of your greatest challenges in the chart, is that Mars square Pluto. You also have Mars conjunct Saturn. And so this is typically a component in which usually when both malefics are conjunct one another, especially because Saturn's in a very powerful placement, when you feel comfortable and when you have the right partnerships in your life, you really can utilize and channel a lot of your personal energy for great works. And you work best when you have like a strong goal in place. And so this is going to be connected with that sort of creative process. And that's where the divide is happening in terms of like how to bring these things together, because you're meant to get to this place, but you might find that there's a resistance when you tap into this Pluto. Like there's a resistance for you to move forward. So you have to really lean into the components of the sun to kind of overcome this. But you can be incredibly disciplined and hardworking. And again, because it's in the 8th house, there's a tendency that you can do this without complaint. Again, there's a tendency with this chart that shows an ability to be sacrificial, an ability to sort of lay down your own desires for the sake of other people. And you have to be mindful of that, because that can definitely be something you come to resent later on. But there's very little you can achieve if you have a plan in place. And one of the best ways so where I think this might be challenged, like if this is like you are a natural creative, right? Or like, and that makes sense with Pisces and the sun on the midheaven. It's very likely you're extremely spiritual or you're extremely creative. With the moon, I have no doubt in my mind. Like it's like I'm 99.9999999% sure that's a core component of you. But you might find that like you feel scared to just dive into creative ideas on a whim. You feel like you need to like set up a system or structure a plan around yourself. But whenever you try to do this, you sort of snap out of the creative process, right? So, one thing you could do, just kind of like a little life hack here to kind of help you, is that you can lean into, it depends on what you're utilizing these plans for. So if you look at a midpoint between these two, you're kind of land in the Sagittarius area. It is very beneficial for you to become close friends or to bring more Sagittarian people into your life. They will come with baggage. They will come with their own problems because it's in the 6th house. And oftentimes we present like challenges or chores through the sixth house because this is the house of daily work and service. But I promise you, like, these individuals can be very helpful for you. They have a great way of being able to, like, they're very, very good at being able to perceive something as it's being presented and be able to sort of pinpoint who it's valuable and who it could be for and how to approach that in a way. Like, they are very visionary, so they can really help you because you're looking at a midpoint between these planets that can show a relief point, like how to come out of like a challenge between planets. And that also is going to kind of link in with sort of like this area of the moon as well. So if you lean into the emotions of it, if you identify your emotional core drive, your reason why, that really will help you to be able to push through those challenges or those resistances in life. Okay, so those are like the main aspects. I don't think I'm missing any. Again, we have this Mercury in conjunct Jupiter, which the quincunx again just kind of shows there can be difficulty in these two planets relating to one another. A way in which we can kind of pinpoint that a little bit more is that Jupiter deals a lot with relations to Pisces and Sagittarius, and it deals with the big picture, whereas Mercury is dealing with like detailed knowledge and communication. So this planet tends to have more of a narrow focus and really loves like a lot of detail and to assess the trees, whereas Jupiter likes to assess the big picture, the forest. So when these two things are quincunx or in conjunct, there's a difficulty in people being able to, and actually I have this placement as well, very, very, very loosely, but I have this placement as well, and I struggle with this a lot too. So there can be a difficulty between expansive and broad thinking and detailed and analytical thinking. So you might find it challenging to be able to assess when you need specifics or to get information quickly versus allowing it to come more naturally and at your own pace and expanding on wisdom instead of just intellect or knowledge. And there can be a tendency to overextend yourself mentally. That definitely also is linked with this moon in Gemini in the 12th, the tendency to overanalyze or tendency to ruminate emotionally. So you might need to learn how to strike a balance between these two things. Mercury is ruled by Mars. So you might do better with more detailed thinking and planning when in collaboration with others or in partnerships, but you might do better with big picture visionary thinking on your own individual inclinations or whims, if that makes sense. So that might be a way in which you can kind of like align those two planets to serve you, is that they have to serve different purposes. And that makes sense because Jupiter is in the first quadrant of self-development and integration of the self, right? And then this Mercury is in the fourth quadrant in the 10th house, which is for societal or universal assimilation. So like, you know, when it comes to your public life or like externalized works, you do really well working in collaboration with others on a detailed basis, but in your personal life, you do better to be more of a big picture visionary thinker. So like that's sort of how you can resolve that conflict with those two planets. Okay, so talking about axes. So we have the axis of self and other. So the axis of self here is that, again, that Cancer, and that has that moon in Gemini in the 12th. Okay, so a lot of how you identify yourself comes through emotional situations, circumstances, how you play a role within a unit, right? And then the partner or partnerships with others are very Saturnian in nature and are linked to the Saturn in Aquarius. So this can typically show that a lot of your experiences in terms of relating with others are that you might draw in a lot of individuals in your life that challenge you to be vulnerable. And that is sort of part of the soulmate purpose of a partner, is to really allow for some to be let in to allow someone in, but also allow for you to experience aspects of relationships that are inherent in every relationship, like being disappointed, right? Or like feeling let down, or feeling misunderstood and unheard and not heard, right? And the development of self is to, at times, separate yourself from these relationships and from fulfilling everybody else's needs, and to hone in and focus on your needs and your greater spiritual values. Creating a space of meditation for yourself is really important, and to develop a sense of identifying yourself that is not linked solely with the family or with from other people's affirmations. Developing and commandeering, grounding the identity in how spirit might view you, how divinity might view you, how you view yourself, like learning to view yourself through a lens of neutrality. Because again, you have this out of bounds moon, and that might be difficult. There might be times where you're really good at that, where you can like detach and like kind of look at yourself and just be super objective about it. And then there might be times where you struggle with that, where you're a little bit more subjective. So that's a lot of what kind of impacts these accesses, or how to understand these. So then the access of private or inner life, and then the access of public life and career. So we see quite a visible public life and career, and there's not a ton of enhancement down here with the area of, and I'm sorry, I thought I had my cursor over here. So the area of private life, right? So again, that was the axis of self, axis of other. So here's the axis of inner life and public life. So we see that the sun, the area of public life, is ruled by this Jupiter in the third. So you are born as a natural counselor and teacher. So there is a lot of wisdom you are meant to impart on the world. And some of that visionary thinking, some of that big picture thinking serves you really well within your career. But a lot of your, a lot of how you might build and flesh out that career is through these collaborative efforts and detailed thinking, right? So we see that there. So then the inner life is linked with this Mercury in the 10th house in Aries. So you might find that you feel more content in your inner life when you have really progressed in your career, and when you feel that you can be a leader, or your voice stands out in contrast to others, or in contrast to the collective. Because Pisces deals a lot with the collective. So there's a desire for you to illuminate something about the collective, but you want to be able to do this in a way in which you feel like you're intrinsically a part of those efforts, or like intrinsically part of creating change. And through this progression in the career, the inner life becomes more enriched, and we even see like a part of fortune there, right? So like you actually gain rewards and benefits through that. So that is talking about the axis of inner life and home life. This might show that that home work-life balance is really important to you, but in your life, your career might come before your family. So that's kind of showing some things to be aware of. Another thing that I want to point out that a lot of people are very interested in is finances. So the second house is the house of finances, and this is also ruled by the moon in the 12th. So one thing to be mindful of, the ruler of your descendant, which typically rules the soulmate, the marriage partner, is in your 8th house of shared resources. So financially, you gain a lot more security through your partner. Your partner will be the breadwinner, because your finances, with the rule of your finances being in the 12th house, is like your financial assets, or like what you accrue, is likely to dissolve over time. It's difficult to hold on to money with this placement. Money really does come and go for you. So in order to feel like you have more sustainable income, that comes through the partner. So that's a benefit towards working on aligning with a partner. But a lot of your life purpose isn't really meant to flesh out this strong core sense of identity. And I feel almost like hurt in my heart saying that, because I feel identity work is really important, even though I don't have like a strong first house in my own chart. It's just through astrology, I find that to be true. But there's a lot of this need to release like this sense of like having this strong, distinct identity. And you're really meant to lean more into being in a harmonious union with another. So like it's part of your life purpose to find your partner, right? But because the North Node is in the 7th house, it actually inherently makes it more difficult. So that's kind of an unfortunate aspect of having the nodes so like on the angles very, very close. Because you might find it is just sort of difficult to find that person. Not impossible, but we can talk more about that in the Divine Life Purpose reading if you wanted to, but we'll digress from that for now. So talking about current transits, that is a good place to start. So let me change the view here quick. Okay, so this is a little difficult to view. My software, I don't love the way they do bi-wheels. But it's easier than me having to go to a whole different site and do all that. So here are some really important, and I'm going to just touch on these briefly because I've already gone over when explaining the chart. So I'm going to have to change. This is my first time selling one of these natal readings. So the premium I have to move to like 90 minutes because 60 minutes is like way too short. Okay. But in terms of transits that are important, so you actually already previously had your Saturn return, but we'll go back and talk about what a lot of the purpose of the Saturn return was. Now Saturn has ingress though into the same sign as your midheaven and sun. So that's going to be a very, very important, the next 3 years or 2.5 years now at this point is going to be a lot of focus on building yourself up in your career. This is a very positive transit for many people, especially when they have an emphasis in the southern hemisphere. It looks north, but southern hemisphere. Saturn, when it hits that midheaven, oftentimes the vocational path is clarified, especially if you're in midlife. So it's very, very probable so a lot of career efforts might really be cleared up for you. And you've been experiencing Neptune just going back and forth over your midheaven and your sun for a very long time. So you might have felt over the past several years the sense of not really knowing what you're doing. Like you're just kind of going through the motions, because Neptune is what we call the great dissolver, and it acts as a mirage or a fog. So you might have really felt a need for clarity about who you are and what you're meant to do. And it's probably become even more intensified as Neptune was on your sun. And that's been happening for the past like 3-4 years or so. Neptune moves incredibly slowly. So in a few more years, Neptune will move into Aries. I think it's in, I actually don't have the ephemeris up, but I think it's in like end of 2025, maybe going into 2026. I may have that wrong. But so yeah, as Saturn moves, and I'm sorry, I realized I had my cursor on the wrong screen again. I had it on my viewfinder. I'm silly. So as Saturn moves towards this midheaven and the sun, there's going to be a big burst in the career. And this North Node in Aries is also ascending to this place as well. So over the next 5 years, you'll get like a double hit in the career, which is going to be really cool. So that's where a lot of your development is leading towards. And many times the Saturn return is a transit that strongly focuses on vocation, because Saturn is naturally a vocational planet. It focuses on work and duty and responsibility. So it links to the vocation even if you don't have the stamp of Saturn in that area. So that's going to be cool. You do have Jupiter, the planet of expansion, going through Taurus, which is in your 11th house of friendship. So you might find that socially you are expanding yourself, especially because Uranus for the past like 5 years has been going through here as well. So Uranus entered Taurus back in like 2019, 2020, around the time the pandemic started. So since then, you might have found that you have been maybe like expanding your social connections online or expanding your parasocial connections. Like, so where like you start to like really connect with like a content creator. But Jupiter through here now as well might show that you really are opening up in terms of communicating with other people, and being able to connect in shared interest. This could be a great way to meet new people within your local area, which is really cool. But it's interesting that this energy is about to trine the bottom of the chart, which is typically dealing with domestic life and residence, and you've been contemplating relocating. So this is kind of probably linking to a lot of your desires to understand, whether you should move or not, right? So that could be a lot of what that is linking to. So you are dealing with a lot of transformations. You had this energy go through your 7th house for quite some time, and now it's entered your 8th house. And so it's going to really be impacting these areas, of strength, but also simultaneously of challenge. So you might find that it's more difficult to resist like being vulnerable with other people. You might really start to enter transformative relationships, which allow you to learn a lot more about yourself and reveal things maybe you typically don't reveal to other people. This can be a positive transit, because again, my husband has these same components, and we met when Pluto was leaving his 8th house. So there are a lot of inner truths that can sometimes be illuminated with this transit. And this is a transit that will have someone focus a lot on their psyche and focus a lot on their internalized monologue or the ways in which they behave. So you might start to really intensely look at, because you're going to have Pluto square Pluto. So you might start to really, as Pluto goes back to Aquarius, you might really start to want to like look at some of your behaviors and look at in some ways how you can better utilize this Pluto placement in your chart. So that's going to be interesting, but this will be a very energized and complex time. Now, luckily you have so much time before it hits Saturn and Mars, so you don't have to worry about that, but I can send you some information on Pluto conjunct those planets if you'd like. You don't have to worry about them anytime soon though, because Pluto moves super slow. It only moves like 2 degrees a year, and it's still been retrograding back into Capricorn. So this is the final time it's going to move into Aquarius, and once it does, it doesn't go back to Capricorn. So this is the 3rd time Pluto's done it now, retrograde back into Capricorn. The faster planets you don't have to worry about as much because you experience these once a year. The nodal path is currently, it just entered your 10th house. So a lot of your focus is going to be on career and public life, less focus on home life. And eventually it will be, it was less focus on romance. So if you were having some problems or struggles with dating, it could have been because for the past 1.5 years, it was moving through this 5th house. And actually, even when it was in Sagittarius, it was moving through the 5th house into Libra. But now it's through the 4th, okay? So there is a sense of detachment from 4th house issues. So one thing that I think could be helpful in terms of relocating is one of the best ways in which you can relocate in a way that'll be beneficial and not disruptive to your life is if you relocate for a job. So that's one thing that I would definitely encourage you to do when you are looking for places, is like get a job offer first before you move. That's always a good way to go. It depends on what you do for work though. Okay. But yeah, that takes care of a lot of the big ones. Lots of changes in social groups and friendships with Uranus, but it's in a fixed sign, so it's not quite as disruptive or eccentric of an energy than if it was in like a cardinal or mutable sign. So you probably had to let go of a lot of social connections or friendships, and then you're rebuilding new ones with Jupiter. So yeah, I think that's a lot of That's a lot of what you're dealing with currently. Again, I could sit and talk for like 2 hours on transits alone. But for the sake of time, I want to move into talking about your Saturn return and just talking a little bit about the purpose of your Saturn return, and you know, what was really the goal of that time and Saturn in your life and in your personal chart. All right, so here we have Saturn in Aquarius. The individual is the Jungian archetype we're going to use for this particular planet. So to understand Saturn in Aquarius and the karmic themes presented, we must first understand Aquarius as a sign by its nature. So again, Aquarius is a fixed air sign ruled by Saturn classically and ruled by Uranus in modern astrology. And this is because before, the ancient astrologers couldn't see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto with the naked eye. And so Saturn was the planet that ruled this particular sign back when we only had the 7 that we use in astrology. So with Aquarius's duty as being the second to last astrological sign, the goal is to gain liberation from worldly and societal constraints and connect with larger issues on the stage of humanity. Now, a lot of this is happening in a more hidden aspect in your life because it's in the 8th house of privacy and intimacy. But we will get there momentarily. But just talking more about the qualities of Aquarius. So positive fixed air indicates that there is a concentration on the outer world and how to use innovation and skill of discernment to strip away things that are unnecessary, nonsensical, or disruptive, to leave the world a better place from whence you came. So one thing to understand about the zodiacal signs that's fascinating is that the wheel of animals, the zodiac, the earlier signs tend to be more grounded in mundane experiences or experiences of the self. And then as we move through that zodiacal wheel, we become more focused on society, the world, humanity, big picture. So a lot of signs like Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, they tend to operate on a larger level energetically, or at least how they focus. So inherently, Saturn in Aquarius can be charismatic, tolerant, unique, inventive, and proactive. Yet individuals with this archetype, when Saturn's here, can struggle to process their own emotions and sense of self without the fabric of a larger group or community. So we definitely had talked about this, whereas there is a tendency or suggestion with this chart to become fixated on obligations or duties to others, or how you can be of benefit to the world, right? So there is some element of Saturn being in the sign that is very important in terms of your life and how to understand your own limitations. So, and with the Saturn return is really a time in our lives in which we are officially moving away from childhood into adulthood. Now, in the US legally, we become adults at 18, but in the eyes of astrology, we're still very much children at this time. And it's not until around the age of 27 that we are kind of officially adult and become accountable or responsible for some element or area of life or life experience. And we do have to become fully responsible for our own nature, actions, reactions. So everything Saturnian earlier in our lives is funneled through authority figures or funneled through universal or divine intervention. So now as we become adults, more of that accountability and responsibility is placed upon ourselves. So oftentimes when we're going through this transition, it is marking the next major transition of learning and developing, and particularly how we are accountable through our vocation and career, or how we help, assist, or benefit society. And so being marked with this transition, a lot of people go through very serious circumstances or events where they have to make major life decisions. So sometimes it's like officially picking that job title or career, right? Even though you went to college, a lot of people don't use the degree that they got in college within their career. So sometimes it can be a choice of that. Sometimes it can be a choice of, am I going to move away from my family, or am I going to remain where I've been? And what are the pros and cons of that? Relationships. Am I gonna get married? Do I want to buy a home? Do I want to buy life insurance? Right? Like these are the types of these like adult things, right? And so this is oftentimes that transition. And during this time, Saturn will often test us specifically in this area where we have the Saturn challenge or limitation. And one thing that's fascinating is that in our lifetime, we've had 3 major events that were introductions to the Saturn return. Our first Saturn square, which is around when we're 7 years old. Our Saturn opposition, which is around the age of 14, I believe. And then the waning Saturn square, which is around the age of like 22, I believe. And this is just all off my memory, so forgive me if none of those are correct. But those are going to be the times in which we're really going to confront like taking accountability. So with Saturn in Aquarius, this speaks to Saturn as a planet being directly associated with creating boundaries and definitions. And with it being in sign of Aquarius, this can create difficulties in merging with social units or expressing one's individuality. Okay, so we talked about there can be a fear of leaning really strong into an identity or presentation, because we talked about that with the moon being in the 12th and the natural inclination of someone with their ascendant in Cancer, where they're typically a little bit more reserved and timid. So now when you have this Saturn in Aquarius, there's a fear around expressing yourself. So while normally when Aquarius is uninhibited by Saturn, it exudes charm, and it has this ability to sparkle and captivate. And oftentimes the Aquarius person isn't really like wrapped up in, oh, please like me, or oh, please like look at me and clap and applaud. That's typically a Leo thing, which is the opposing sign. Aquarius just kind of does its thing and kind of just is a little bit of a Pied Piper. Like if people follow along, great. If they don't, oh well, I'm fine. I'm chilling on my own, right? So these are the originals. These are the wild ones of life. And when your Saturn is in Aquarius, this actually makes you more reclusive. And what's interesting is that you might really desire to be that person, and you probably are, because you have Venus in Aquarius in the 9th, but you might intellectualize these things or depersonalize them from yourself. You might not really identify with them or take them on. It might be because you have a fear of appearing to be performative, right? Or have a fear of like not being authentic. So it might be something to where you just choose to not like really put that energy out there. So even if others find you to be equally charming or engaging as somebody who has this sign, maybe more unencumbered, you really don't want to bring a lot of attention to yourself. So you prefer to keep to yourself and mind your tongue with this placement. But the goal is to be able to learn to wield the sign that Saturn is in for your benefit. So it has to be utilized in a way that makes sense and has a tangible outcome, because that is how Saturn works. Saturn works in tangibility. It doesn't like things that are intangible or don't serve a purpose. So the goal is for you to utilize the expression of Aquarius in a very intentional way. And in other words also, is that you may not want people to realize how unusual or independent or unique you are. You might hide those things that make you unique. And so that's always, quite interesting. So with Venus in the 9th house, because it's more visible there, you might find that you don't mind people knowing to some degree that you have unique interests, or like you might have a lot of like philosophy around certain affinities or hobbies, but like things that you actually do or enjoy that are unusual, you might really not want to put those things on display. but you might really align with them still. So because Saturn is a planet that's directly associated with creative boundaries, the goal is to break through the barriers so that you are able to tap into the sense of equitable values. So you will find that your universe will open up and you can feel more confident to step into a role of accountability or responsibility, or you can feel like you can express yourself more. When you own your own individuality and embrace your real self and all of its magnificence. And now, to be fair, because Saturn's in the 8th, you know, and the moon's in the 12th, there's a good chance you're probably never going to be somebody that's like, hey, look at me, like a big showboat. That's probably not really ever going to be you, because it's still, your natal chart is still essentially your natal chart, right? But learning to get more comfortable and learning to trust a little bit more, or learning to be more comfortable with being vulnerable, is part of the goal, right? So you will be unable to dismantle the limitations that you want to be free of until you can learn to do this. And how this often tends to result is that it can impact your career, but because this planet rules relationships, this will prevent you from finding the soulmate archetype until you can conquer this lesson. So because the Saturn return passed already, I'd be very curious to hear, you know, how this impacted relationships with you, especially because you had Pluto going through the 7th house for like 15 years prior to this point in your life. So very, very curious. 12, 15 years. Well, your 7th house is much smaller, but it was going through Capricorn for that long. So maybe 10 years. 10 years prior to this, you had Pluto going through, you know, this area, which means that you might have had some very intense relationships, like romantic relationships. And maybe, you got burned a little bit, right? But it's through that process that you learn, right? So if you're able to reveal or prioritize some aspects of your uniqueness to reveal, in a more upfront manner, that might be the key that really captures the interest of your life partner, and that could be what sort of brings you together. So hiding and fearing vulnerability doesn't help in terms of two of the most major areas of life that most people are interested in when it comes to Saturn. So yeah, you'll continue to feel like your career isn't progressing, or you can't break the glass ceiling, or your relationships are stagnant or filled with toxic dynamics, or you can't disengage from your family. So you just might find that you tend to continually make decisions that don't really help you or are not a good use of your time. So Saturn in the 8th archetypally is known as the alchemist for me. And this is because the 8th house is naturally aligned with transformation. It's transformation of the self. And usually transformations are internal. So again, we talked about how the 8th house is quincunx, or there is low visibility to the ascendant. So oftentimes it's like the hidden self or the shadow self is linked with the 8th house. And the shadow self, or the shadow realm of oneself in terms of psychological work, is where a lot of the groundbreaking work of internal development happens and takes place. But again, a lot of this is not seen to the public or to the outside. It's only seen by those we're super duper close with and we trust. And it's through this alchemy that we rise above our circumstances and we change and improve for the better. So when Saturn is placed in the 8th house, I mentioned this is the house of privacy and secrets and intimacy. It's also the house of sex and shared resources, and the house of transformation. So this can give you a really strong inclination or a sense of duty and responsibility to continually improve yourself. But this sense of improvement is done more in private versus the type of self-development that's done with the first house, which is more about development of the identity. But here it's more of like development through the understanding of our psyche, the understanding of why we behave the way we do, how our past experiences impact us, how external relationships influence us. So there's a need for you to explore this area with Saturn here. And so since Saturn is a planet that really denotes our capacity for control and structure, oftentimes there can be a repressed ability for one with this placement to be open and transparent. And I'm, in some ways preaching to the choir because my son's in the 8th house. So like I live and breathe 8th house stuff. It's one of the reasons I don't have a big social media presence, because I am scared shitless of being super vulnerable with people. I don't like putting myself on display. And that's just, unless I'm doing something maybe like creative, I don't mind. But if it's something really serious, or if I'm doing like transformative work with people or spiritual work with people, I prefer for that to be very private. I prefer for certain aspects of myself to not be part of this story that I like, again, pick up the megaphone and announce it to the world, right? Like it's just not my style. And that's a core part of myself, is to continually evolve through inner work. So a lot of the reasons because of this, the 8th house is in a lot of ways inherently linked with trauma, or crisis, like very intense experiences. And so sometimes this Saturn placement can be a nod towards having traumatic experiences early in life, or, a generational sort of nod where like the parents had trauma and some of those beliefs got passed down to you. Again, that's usually a suggestion. That's a core association I've seen with this. It doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's happened to you. So definitely no offense. This is just something I see commonly. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen Saturn in the 8th, or like a very strong planetary placement in the 8th where that person did not have a strong core trauma. It's just, in my husband has Saturn Mars in the 8th, as I mentioned earlier, and I have never heard a more, in real life anyway, a more horrifying history of trauma than my husband. Like, just has really been through the ringer, right? So that could be the case with you, right? This could also relate to the fact that you could have deep feelings of shame and inadequacy. So a fear of inadequacy, or as I mentioned earlier, a fear of failure can be associated with this. So Saturn's response is to try and mitigate and control the narrative of this and the direction that the native uses in their life, so the direction you take in your life, as much as possible, to where you feel or you are so adamant to not let people see those deepest parts of yourself that you don't really allow people in. However, with Saturn's return, there's often a test to the foundation and structure we've built with our inner selves during our youth. So you may find that any negatively embedded beliefs or fears will have a spotlight shine upon them during this time. And the goal is for Saturn to test our resolve to our core. It's a difficult placement to have Saturn in the 8th for the Saturn return. So I'm sure the past 3 years were really, really difficult for you. So I there are some people who have had mostly positive Saturn returns. I am one of those people. I had a pretty positive Saturn return, and that usually happens if Saturn is in a very strong sign, which in this case yours is. But also if it's not in a house that's like very sensitive, which in this case Saturn was not in a house super sensitive, although it is conjunct my midheaven. So I had a lot of career development during my Saturn return. That was the big thing for me. But simultaneously, even though I had a productive Saturn return, I also simultaneously say, like, I'm lucky I made it out of my Saturn return alive. So some people do have positive Saturn returns. So you might look back on your Saturn return in hindsight because you have a diurnal chart and Saturn is very strongly placed, that there may be a benefit. You might feel grateful you went through the Saturn return, but the process of going through it was probably very difficult. but you're meant to create lasting changes that propel you towards a stronger sense of self and of emotional security. The eighth house is also known as the house of death, because with transformation, it can be about life, death, and rebirth. So sometimes there could be a metaphorical death and a rebirth that takes place. And this can be a time in which you must confront your fears surrounding loss and poverty and sacrifice in order to step into being a mature and seasoned adult who takes accountability. So the topic of Saturn in the eighth is purification through pain. And it really does have that statement similar to Kanye West: what does not kill you makes you stronger. So you may modify or reinvent yourself. Again, the alchemist, right? Take different components of yourself and rebuild them into something new. I like to use the example of Japanese pottery, where they use the liquid gold to fuse a broken piece back together. It's a very similar process that we're doing here. And in some ways, they regarded the piece as being more beautiful because of it. So, you may definitely, again, go through this process of change in order to reinvent yourself. And this is an evolutionary manner for you to ensure preservation or cope with adverse surroundings. So the paradigm of what you're going to experience is mostly based on your ability to bear with suffering and rebound with resiliency or boldness. So, additionally, the eighth house also speaks of shared resources. So there can be a challenge in learning to trust sharing with others. So not just sharing, like being open, but it could also be like allowing for that person to come in and have some sense of control. That is also an element that can happen with the Saturn return that someone is greatly fearful of. So this can be literal in terms of property, assets, or finances, but this can also be psychological and intangible in nature. So sharing your emotional self and body, again, this is the house of sex. So especially if that Saturn in the eighth is linked to a early life sexual trauma, then the Saturn return can bring about feelings of crisis or fear of their safety when it comes to being intimate physically with somebody. So this can be a really great challenge for people as well. So it's difficult to say how I view this, because I do think it's definitely possible that there is relationship trauma there, because the Pluto square, Mars and Venus and Saturn, absolutely. And Saturn ruling the area of relationships. I think that there definitely could be suspicion or paranoia around new relationships in your life. But it could definitely be linked with other things. It could definitely be linked with like a sense of being territorial and, a sense of fear of impoverishment. So like there could be a fear of being generous and sharing. I don't get that sense because, your chart does show a lot of notes of being self-sacrificing. So I would sooner lean in that it's a relationship thing. But there can be other ways in which that can show up for you. So again, these are just ways that I can guide you as an astrologer. It may not be accurate to your experiences. Again, I have yet to have someone tell me that none of this matched with them. So hopefully I'm doing my job correctly. Okay. So yes, that's what Saturn was primarily about in terms of your return. So, one of the ways in which you can kind of know if you achieve the lesson of the Saturn return is how much you aligned with, how many changes did you make relative to the areas of the eighth house and relative to finding a way to open yourself up more to expressing the Aquarius energy. And I would say expressing it in a more personal way, because the ninth house is like not entirely like a personal house. So you might express some of these characteristics to a degree because you have other planets there. But in terms of like taking ownership of these types of characteristics that you might have, that might be something that you've had a challenge with. So depending on what those things are, that might be something to consider. So in terms of, okay, so I spoke earlier that you had other times in which Saturn, you went through the Saturn challenge. So I'm going to highlight what those are. So what I'm going to do is going to take the last time Saturn was square Saturn. Okay, so let me go to the other one. Okay, so the last one you had, so you were born in 1992. So you had it around March 17th of 2000. Now you may not remember what this one was. You may remember. It might be a core memory. It did happen in that area of friendship. So maybe this was like you had an opportunity to open up to somebody, and maybe you opened up and maybe something happened, or maybe you didn't open up and you weren't able to pursue a friendship that could have been very pivotal in your life. So, I'm trying to think of what like a young kid could go through in relation to Saturn and relationship houses. So that's one area where if you reflect, maybe you'll remember something, maybe you won't. This is also the house of dreams and aspirations, the 11th house. So it could be that there's an opportunity for you to maybe connect with an aspiration or a dream, but maybe you didn't take the opportunity because you were fearful or scared that people would make fun of you, right? Like this is kind of like just trying to think in terms of how Saturn works. So the next time Saturn was opposed. So Saturn was opposed, your natal Saturn, July 31st of 2006. Okay. So usually it can happen like, in the preceding months or the following months. Usually it's going to happen in the preceding or when it goes direct. So if something didn't happen right in July or right in March, it could have been like January of 2000, right? Or, it could have been like December of 1999. So it could be something like that. So same here. This could be like, something happened in like May or April, right? Usually it's going to happen as it's about to go exactly activate. So, but it was around this time that there was some sort of occurrence, and this happened in the second house. So, okay, this is my resources versus what I'm sharing with others, right? So this, usually the opposition is a pretty big one. Usually there's something happening around that time where we go, whoa, okay, that this is heavy. This feels like a lot, right? So it usually happens like at that tender age, like 14, 15 years old, and everything feels hard at that age. And that's where I theorize a lot of teenage angst comes from, right? And sometimes it happens as it's moving into the sign it's in, right? So depending on where the sign, like where your Saturn is in relation to the sign, some people enter that teenage angsty age earlier, some do it later. For me, it was later, which was interesting. My mom thought she got out of my teenage angst unscathed. Little does she know, she did not. Okay. And then the 90-degree angle here. Okay. So this would have happened in the 5th house of creativity, authentic self-expression, and romance. And this happened around November 3rd of 2013. And look, you had Pluto just having gone over your north node. That's the life path right there. Okay. So that was a big one. The opposition and the waning square were big ones. Usually the first one is softer because you're a child. Like Saturn kind of understands, like children can't take responsibility quite in the same way an adult can. But you learn from an early age. Like my daughter's going through her Saturn square, my youngest daughter right now, her waxing one. So it's been very interesting. She's matured a lot at this age. Like I'm fascinated with what Saturn's done with her because she's a very interesting child. Very interesting child. Okay. So yeah, that's the last time Saturn was square. Okay. Now let's get into, again, because I've gone over, if you have any more questions about Saturn return, feel free to let me know. But let's go ahead and talk about the soulmate. Okay, so this is pretty important stuff. I saved the best and usually most anticipated part for last. So, talking about the soulmate. So, one of the ways in which we're able to start working with this information is, and I'm going to do a nifty trick here in a minute, but we understand the soulmate and what separates a soulmate from just a romantic partner. A romantic partner is somebody you have personal and sexual or romantic emotional compatibility with. And there are relationships that can sustain themselves without being a soulmate match. But in order to qualify, or in astrology, how we would quantify someone's a soulmate match, is that they have to enhance the natal promise of the individual. So their very presence in your life is helping and assisting you in your life purpose, long and short of it. And so one of the best ways to kind of have a very sustainable match is when both individuals fulfill the soulmate contract. So how do you know what the soulmate contract is in your life? And what are the benefits? How does that separate? So how that separates from just a standard romantic connection is that a soulmate match will inherently become more invested and embedded in your life, because now you both gain value and you both serve a value in that other person's life. And as you grow together, you find that the relationship, it has more of this tenderness. You feel more like you identify as one unit versus we're kind of just dating, right? Or like we're kind of just, yeah, like they're mine, I'm theirs. Like this is like, I'm possessive of this, or like, this is a statement of status, right? Like I'm desirable, I'm taken, da, da, da. Like there's lots of reasons why people enter relationships. But once you get that soulmate like integration, they're optimizing your chart and you're optimizing theirs. So it feels good to have them in your life. It doesn't mean you don't have problems or you don't go through your issues, but the interactions are just inherently so natural that you find that resolutions come easier. You're more able to work as a team. And again, people are just more invested to stay. And that's what a lot of people care about when it comes to if they're interested in a long-term relationship, monogamy, marriage. Typically they're seeking something that's going to go the distance. They don't want to, waste their time. They want to give their time to someone who's going to love them as they are, right? And so this is what helps people in their life purpose, right? And it's also because as you are funneling all your experiences in life through the lens of Cancer, you're inherently losing out, or you are lacking in the perspective of Capricorn. Okay. So the goal is to bring in a partner who has the Capricorn stamp, who has a strong Capricorn or Saturnian energy, so that you are able to gain the benefits, and vice versa. This person should lack a lunar stamp in their chart, or they should lack Cancer in some way, or they should lack a lot of water in the chart. Like there should be some stamp like that. There are many different ways that you can assess if you've met a soulmate match. They're difficult to find, but it's easy to identify them when you do find them. Okay, so because you are viewing life through this lens of Cancer, which is all about stepping into a nurturing or matriarchal role, building communities, connecting and relating with others on a soul level, leading your life through intuition and instinct. That's a lot of what the ascendant in Cancer is designed to do. So when you are looking for a partner who's from the sign of your descendant, which is Capricorn, you are looking for somebody who is very aligned and in control in the mundane world. So they're very attuned or focused on career or vocation, or working really hard and being very, very disciplined. And there is typically the perspective has an ability to not hyper fixate on the emotionality or subjectivity. They're more objective, they're more outcome focused, they're more work focused and labor focused typically. And so having someone come in with this type of enhancement, they'll naturally help to ground your perspectives in life and ground some of your initiation. So they can kind of point out when you might be leaning into the Cancer energy too much. And they are a great solid grounded energy because it's earth, okay? And water energy is very fluid and loose. And so a lot of people with water ascendants or a lot of water in their chart, they struggle to feel grounded, right? They struggle to feel secure. So the partner in your life is meant to help you feel secure. The partner in life is meant to give you a foundation to stand on. And so you are typically going to be looking for somebody who has a lot of those qualities: hardworking, disciplined, steadfast, no nonsense. In some ways, like, the partner could be a little vanilla with Capricorn. That can, you are probably going to be the exciting one, right? I mean, I think your partner will have some excitement, or they'll be very mesmerized by the type of excitement that you bring to their life. But on a surface level, the core personality is very straight-laced. This is also probably someone who has the perspective of coming from maybe like a very conventional background, or they do align with conventional core values are conventional. Now, this doesn't mean that they don't have an openness, because again, the ruler of this, descendant is Saturn in Aquarius. So they do have the ability to be progressive and innovative, but they also they're a realist, right? Like, they understand the way the world works. They understand that, there are elements of life or aspects of life where, we can't just sit and dream the day away, right? Like, we have to work hard, play later. So that's typically the type of energy you're going to be getting with this person, right? Again, we also see typically sometimes people with this type of enhancement also can be people who are very methodical, or people who are very they are very oriented towards success. So a lot of these people are very self-driven, is another type of energy you get with this. Now, of course, we can dive into this more if we look at, Saturn in the 8th, right? But we'll get to that in a minute. Another thing you're going to look for, which I mentioned way earlier in the reading, is Jupiter in the 3rd. So Jupiter in the 3rd is in Virgo. So this is sort of how your partner integrates into the spousal role or into a long-term partnership role. So when it's in Virgo, you do get a strong inclination towards a partner that really feels communication is the backbone to any relationship. So this person is going to be very, very focused on problem solving and focusing on solutions. So this person is probably somebody who wants to sort of look at certain elements of your lives together and develop and restructure them to become, again, something better, or to improve upon certain circumstances in your life. And this might be something that you guys would talk about at length. Like, this is probably something your partner would really want to teach you, right? So they reward you that you can learn through their wisdom, and their wisdom is more mundane and practical. So this person is probably really good at teaching you how to do things that no one's ever taught you to do, that really help you, that aren't just solely linked towards your natural inclination of thinking. They help bring in new ideas. And these are things that likely enhance your day-to-day functioning. So this could be all sorts of things. I mean, we think about where the ruler of Jupiter is, it's Mercury in the 10th. So this person can help you in terms of career progression, right? They could help you in terms of learning how to do work with a certain software that your job has decided you need to start working with. They have experience in it. They can teach you how to do it, or they pay for a certification for you, or they know a guy that knows a guy that can get you in the door, right? Especially sometimes this can be if you are a writer, right? Because Jupiter in the 3rd can be a writer. A lot of times if they're not a counselor or an advocate of some sort, or a teacher, usually it's a writer then. So if you're a writer, he might go, I know a guy in publishing, right? You give me your manuscript. That's kind of these are the type of doors that your partner could open for you. And you just might find that you learn so much from this person. You just find that you are very enraptured with the way they carry themselves, the way that they speak, and you just are always eager to learn. So there is a dynamic to this relationship that kind of leans a little bit like parental or like mentor mentee, which is kind of cool. I have a similar dynamic with my husband and I really love it. So because I have a stamp too of like the learner. So I really love it. Like I think it's great. And he thinks it's great because he feels like he's useful. Like he feels like, oh my gosh, she like listens to me and she's grateful when I give advice or when we bounce ideas. And I feel like seen, you know, like I want to be around this person because I just feel like, you know, I feel like I am valued in this relationship. So that's a lot of what you can get from that. So this is, again, where they'll enrich your life, where they will open you up. They might, I mean, if you have siblings, they can also get on well with your siblings, and the rewards and blessings can pass on to your siblings and neighbors. So he also might be a very nice neighbor, a very kind neighbor. Another thing is that Virgo energy is very neat and orderly and organized. So he might also clean up your life. Like if you feel like, oh man, I'm kind of a mess, which like, honestly, like, you know, that's a vibe, right? Like I get that. Like your partner could just come in and be like, I'm just going to make life easier for you. I'm going to help organize. I'm going to do things that help you day to day without you having to ask. Like, that's fine. I got you. So like, I'll do the grocery run because I remember you said we needed this. Like, I'll change your oil. I'll do this. I'll do that. Like, so they kind of lean towards acts of service, which is so cool. If you're into that type of love language style, it was not one of my top ones that I expressed, but I love having it in my life for sure. So now what we're going to do is we are going to put, ta-da, the 7th house, the descendant, on the ascendant. So when you do this, you can read a ton about your partner and your person. So this is really going to help you to know what to look for, to like kind of be able to begin to start being strategic with dating and identifying what would be strong signs that this is a good match and what are going to be strong signs that this is not a match. One thing that's important for you to know is that typically Cancer ascendant women oftentimes pull in and marry older men, distinctly older. Now this doesn't have to be, it doesn't always have to be, because the Saturn is still in Aquarius, so they could still have like, they could still be part of the Aquarius generation or the strong Saturn generation, so the generation before when Saturn was going through Capricorn. So this person could be 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years older than you, right? But older is not a bad thing for you. So like if you go with older, that's great. You're gonna want to lean older over younger. The only way I would lean younger is if that Saturn is right on that sun. That means like this is a young person, but they're wise beyond their years. Like that would be, but other than that, typically you're going to get someone older. So that's one of the first things you're going to look for. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule. So if other things I identify along the way match up with this person besides the age, don't lean too much into the age. So what we see with this are quite a few observations. So one of the first things I'm going to talk about is describing the typical appearance of this person. This is a great way to again, be able to identify what they're going to look like. And this is a very interesting, very interesting appearance. So Capricorn is linked with Saturn, and Saturn is about structure, Saturn's about structure. Foundations. In medical astrology, it's linked with the skeleton. So one thing you typically see for people who have a strong core energy of Capricorn, regardless if their ascendant is Capricorn, their sun is in Capricorn, doesn't matter, right? Oftentimes you might find that this energy is on their 4th house or on their 10th house as well. So that would be like an Aries, what would that be? Like, an Aries ascendant or a Libra ascendant. Yes. Okay. So point is, you don't want to worry too much about what their actual chart says. You want to sort of just identify it energetically, leave it to the astrologer to identify whether the soulmate indicators are there. But this person, it's linked with the skeleton. So oftentimes this can be that someone has a very symmetrical face and there's not a lot of fat or extra flush on the face. So that's one of the first things. Typically, these people can be conventionally attractive, but not typically like, ooh, wow, like so alluring or captivating or sexual or magnetic. Like they just tend to have a very I call this like the classic Hollywood face. So like the era of like the 1930s, 1940s American film. Look at a lot of the male actors from back then. They have high cheekbones, like haughty, like narrow like cheeks. They have usually thin almond eyes, a strong forehead, angular, very strong pointed nose, but it's very classic, very streamlined. Usually the chin can have a cleft in it. We see that commonly. Strong jawline, but not typically super square. You get that more with Mars ruled, but you might get like an angular jawline or an oval face, but the face is thin and lean and kind of elongates and like kind of like pulls downward. That's going to be a lot of what you see. Lips are going to be thinner as well typically, but they can be shapely. And there can be skin issues with this. So like that's kind of one of the ones where like sometimes this person could have dry skin or eczema. At worst, they could have like psoriasis or something because this is linked with the skin. Sometimes this person could have had dental problems, but this doesn't mean they don't have a nice smile. It just means that like they could have gone through a lot of dental work. So I'm a good example of that. I have what a lot of people say are very nice straight teeth, but God, did I have to go through so much dental work to get a mouth like this. Like it did not happen naturally. So this is something that you'll typically see with these individuals. Typically there's nothing dramatic in height. They tend to be average height. Sometimes, now we're going to change this definition, but sometimes they can be on the shorter side, but typically about average height, which is around 5'10" in America. In Europe, it's 5'11". If you're in like Scandinavia or like Russia, it tends to lean a little bit taller, but it's around 5'10". And the features, the skin tends to be light, like a lighter color and cool in tone. And the hair tends to sit in like the medium-ish brown tones, or like the general like the brow line, the hair, the eyes tend to have like medium to dark pigmentation is what you're typically going to see. So despite the genetic background, so like whether this person is Caucasian, Southeast Asian, Latin, African descent, doesn't matter. They are going to lean somewhere middle of the spectrum in terms of pigmentation. The hair tends to be thin and straight with these people. Okay, now the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. Saturn in Aquarius in the second house. So, and I've done a lot of research to understand how these things work, but Aquarius is going to add a unique stamp. So there's something about your life partner. They have a captivating, noticeable trait to their appearance that is like instantly recognizable. So a really good way of like understanding this is, this can be sometimes the way they present themselves, which is like they do their hair in a really cool way, or they dye it a really bright color constantly. That's one way. But typically this is something like genetic on their face. So a good example is, I forget the actor's name, but he was on, hold on, I'm just going to look it up quick. Okay, I got it. Jesse Williams. Okay, so Jesse Williams on Grey's Anatomy, he's, biracial or African descent. He's got this dark golden skin, but then he has these like blue eyes, right? Like just poo in your face. That's oftentimes what you're going to see. It's going to be something super distinct that stands out. But another thing that happens with Aquarius, for some reason, is you get incredible height with these people. So there is a chance that your life partner is actually quite tall. So if they don't have something super distinct that genetically is recessive, like having really dark skin and red hair, or blonde hair, or like super captivating bright eyes, or like this incredible smile, or like something that's like captivating or interesting about them on the face. Like even like Joaquin Phoenix, who has like the scar from the lip, surgery, but people find that really attractive, right? Like there's something distinct on the face. If it's none of those things, it could be that your partner is like super tall, like 6'3" type of thing. And it could be that not only is he tall, he's broad, which is interesting because it's in the second house of Taurus, and Taurus is ruled by the ox. So oftentimes you can get like a barrel chest, like big dude, like just tall, like this dude is like intimidating. So we still get a lot of the classic lines and features of Capricorn, but then we get this like sort of massive appearance, which is really cool. It kind of gives, he doesn't have this component, but it kind of gives like a little bit like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, or, you know, it gives like kind of something like that, like just like big dude, right? So that's really interesting. And, you know, he might really enjoy health and like taking care of himself because the emotional components are commandeered to the sixth house. So he might enjoy doing things for people, but he also might enjoy like health and taking care of himself. And he might be quite active, right? Like that's kind of something that we can sometimes see here. So those are going to be some components about his life, about like what he looks like. If we look down here, so again, we're inversing your chart. So we see that there's a lot of illumination or clarity from the youth or young life. So he might have known exactly what he wanted to do in life from a really young age, or like something about like when he came into this world, he developed very quickly. He could have a sharp intellect, like this person is likely just very wise, or like very witty and clever. And it could be that the family offered him a lot of freedom, right? Expansive qualities of Pisces offered him a lot of freedom to explore those things. Okay, so we see that we get a lot of support from the family life with the sun because it's not being encumbered. And then we also get a lot of influence from friends and peers. Okay, so this person's probably very sociable. Friendship is going to be very important to him. He is very driven by his aspirations. This is not somebody who is just laissez-faire. I don't really care about, you know, my job or my career. So even though like when we inverse the chart, the sun is not, you know, up here near the 10th, we still see there's a lot of enhancement that this person just sort of knew what to do with their career from an early age, or like they kind of knew what they should be doing in life, like sort of what their purpose was. They probably just learned it like before they were 10 for sure, right? Lucky, right? And that's one of the benefits of having a chart that has a lot of the planets down here in the northern, I know it's inverse, the southern hemisphere, is that sometimes you learn more later in life. You're more of an early bloomer than a late bloomer. So he probably was an early bloomer. And he also is probably very naturally sensitive. So even though he can come across very serious, it might be that he was taught empathy and kindness from a very early age. This can also be because Venus is in the third, that he grew up with a sister, or he grew up really close to his mom, or like an aunt, or like he might have a lot of understanding of women. So we see an emotional intellect there too, which is super cool. Then we see that there is some disruption once we start getting towards the career for him. So this is another way to kind of identify the soulmate, is through what they say they do for work. So, and I one of the reasons I developed this reading is because most of the way people date nowadays is through online dating. And so one of the things that, in terms of online dating, that, one of the things that you learn early on before you even have to talk to this person is a lot of people say what they do for work. And it's a good way to kind of start weeding out people that don't seem like they'd be a good match. But you can also, if you talk to a person, you can start to understand their motivations and start to understand their inclinations towards why they went into a certain career field. So as I mentioned, this person likely was very smart and capable from an early age, just very blessed. He picked up things very, very quickly. Probably had great social connections from an early age. So we see a lot of this sort of like energy here. And then we start getting into the adult life, like once we start going to college. And one of the things that likely happened when this person started going to college is that there could have been a couple of things. The ability to go to school was disrupted by a health issue, or It took a while for him to be able to go to school because while the parents were rich in maybe giving him a lot of support and wisdom and advice, they might have been poor, right? Saturn in the second might have been poor in terms of like actual financial support. So this person could have went into the workforce first before going into school. That's one of the first options. Second option is that they're so multifaceted that they got into college and didn't know what to do. They were like, I don't know whether I should do what I'm naturally good at and what I want to do, or if I should do what my parents are telling me I should do. So sometimes we can get tiger parents with that. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of contrasting this though. Typically we don't see tiger parents with that, but maybe in terms of career, they also place a lot of emphasis on, hey, like this is what you should do like in your career, right? So that's kind of one thing you can see there. Or it just could have been, you know, that regular life got in the way of him being like really present and engaged in college. But chances are this person's going to be educated. Whether they finish college or not, they likely should have pursued college at some point, especially at our, you know, our age, once we're in our 30s. You know, maybe they didn't go right when they're 18, but they would probably have gone at some point, right? So then we see that there's some complication once we get to college. It's like, oh my gosh, there's like so much, you know, there's so many things I can do. I don't know what to do, but I know I'm smart. I know I'm capable. I'm really good with data and analytics and research. And I have a desire to help people. Like I have a desire to serve. So I want to go into some sort of specialist field. So that's really important. This person likely works in a job that not anybody can just get up and do, right? Like this is something that requires a certain amount of intelligence or having a certain IQ, involves a lot of schooling and training. Like you can't just like, you know, like in a way, like anybody can become an entrepreneur or business owner, right? Like it, to a degree, right? Like if you have the capital, if you have an idea, if you got a location for like brick and mortar, like, you know, anybody can kind of sell a product, right? But doing real specialized work, like being a statistician or a research analyst or a translator, or like it kind of takes like a specialist type of training, and it's likely something that he already started to develop early on, right? So we see that. So typically this is when we see someone who shines in mathematics, or someone who shines as a scientist, or someone who shines in like mechanical engineering. Like they started off in like robotics, or like they started off like learning to code in their basement. Like this is kind of like what you get with someone like this. So they likely had a talent or proclivity early, and then they kind of had a time in their life where they were like unsure of what they wanted to do, and then eventually they go into like, they pick something and they go all in and become a specialist. Again, it's ruled by Mercury, this Virgo, so it's like very forest from the trees. They're more detail oriented than big picture oriented. So that's something that you're gonna see with this particular type of energy. So a lot of people with this type of stamp go into some of the career fields I mentioned. We can also get someone who goes into the medical field. Now, I actually think that might be their mistake, because the 6th house is medical, and like I could see that maybe there's like something where they go into the wrong type of medical field, or like there's something where like they thought they'd like it, but then they didn't like it. Something like that probably happened, right? Or it could be that they really wanted to go into the medical field, but then like they were like, well, I don't know if I want to do that much school, so I'll start with this, and then they changed their mind. So something like that. So the medical field is common. Veterinarianism is very common with this placement, especially because the sun Pisces is also down here. So this spectrum tends to link to animal care. So very much could be an animal lover. Probably has an animal, might have one or two that they really love that are like their babies. So hopefully you like dogs or cats or whatever they have. Yeah, so you can get teachers, but you get more instructors than full-on teachers. So again, this could be teaching in higher education, like they're more on a professor level. We can get that. Administrative work, executive work is common with this. So he could be some sort of like executive assistant. He could be like a VP, you know, he could be something like that. Programming, anything dealing with like numbers, technology, complex systems, needing certification, needing a lot of education. Those are going to be the type of career fields that are going to typically work. Linked with the fourth house, so this could also be possibly going into property management. This could go into like commercial real estate. This could go into residential real estate. That's another link that we see there. This can go into the study of child development and family therapies. You can kind of get that sort of vibe too. This could be pediatrics, so like going into like child medicine. But jobs that you're not typically going to see, or anything that's like too artistic, anything that doesn't have like a strong basis in how the world works today. So like going into a job field that like doesn't serve a large demographic, or going into a field that isn't like useful, or at least like something that is essential or an improvement to society. So you're not going to get jobs like that. So your wedding planners, your things that they would, someone might think is frivolous, and it's a Capricorn ascendant. So typically they think a lot of things are frivolous. So anything like dancing, theater, this could be like even like cosmetics, like selling things that are like apparel and fashion, like things that are more expressive and entertainment focused. You're not going to get a lot of that. You're also going to get a lot of things that are more linked towards the mind and processing things, like processing data. So you're not going to get a lot of things that are very focused on hands-on labor. So you're not going to get like typically like your armed forces. Oh, that could have been another thing. He started in the military. So he could have started in the military but then left. So there's that too. So you're not going to get a lot of like your armed forces, carpenters, mechanics, like cement workers, pourers, like, construction, like you're not going to see stuff like that. Typically, you're going to see more formalized instruction or mentorship versus consulting, where the collaborations are equal. So you're not going to see typically a lot of like counseling or consulting, human resources. Like we're not going to see a lot of that, where it's all about like collaboration and kumbaya. It's a lot of this like here, like my mind is like too like, I have a unique skill set where it would kind of be a waste of time for me to do that kind of thing. And it's not to kind of insult how this person thinks. It's just kind of the reality for them. So yeah, you kind of get a sense they're probably going to go into STEM. Like that's probably where they're going to go. If not, they might be like if they don't go into STEM, like I don't really know. I can't really think of what else they would do. Let me see. Mars is in the second. I mean, it's pretty strongly, because they do like health and stuff. They could go into health. I mean, they could just go into health, but they could go more loosely into health, like health adjacent, like nutrition, dietitian, acupuncturist. A lot of acupuncturists are surprisingly like Virgo placement. So that's a lot of what you're going to get with like the type of career. And again, their motivations are typically to serve or to utilize this gift of intellect or skill set that they have. So that's going to be a lot. If you quiz them or ask them, that's going to be a lot of their motivations. In terms of like how they might like respond in relationship to you, like how they build an affection. Okay, so here's the big thing. So the 8th house, how they are intimate, how they let someone in, is ruled by the moon. The moon's in the 6th house of service. So this is a man that is like, let me help you. That's a big thing. Let me help you. If you allow me in to help you with like how your life runs and functions, I feel so good in that dynamic when I help. When I am helpful, I feel good. And that's because the basis of the background, the childhood, is the parents taught a lot of altruism. They taught a lot of charitability. So this person is just naturally inclined to want to help. They may not always come through or be the most reliable, moon in Gemini, but they really do want to help. And part of the reason they may not come through like super reliably is because like they might really want to like give you the agency to kind of like run your life as well. They don't want to like dictate or micromanage your life. They just want to help your life. So they feel more connected if they interact with you day to day. So they don't do well with distance. So I don't recommend long distance with someone like this. It might start off long distance because, you know, how you come and reward them is through the 9th house, which is like foreign, right? So like you might introduce foreign concepts or wisdom as well. But this could also be like how it starts is that you guys are long distance and then maybe you move or something, right? But they do well with like day-to-day interaction. They want to be like merged with someone, and that appeals to you as a Cancer ascendant because you want someone in your life, but someone who also can respect that you need space. This is someone who definitely can do that with the duality aspect here. So, but they build in that affection when they feel like you trust them. Romantically, this links back to Mars. So this person might really enjoy physical touch, or they might really, really enjoy like gifting you with things. Like they might be very generous or giving. And to them, it might not mean much. Like they might have come from a poorer background or more impoverished. So in their adult life, they like when they have money, they're like, I just want to give. Like, I don't want to, I don't feel the need to hold on to it. I want to like make sure we have our essentials, but I really feel good when I give you things like that you haven't like had before. It also could be that they want to provide security for you. So this person might really want to merge in a unit with you and like buy you a home and like, you know, help buy you a car. And like this person would be very willing to like co-sign on a vehicle, or like, you know, this is someone who's going to be very like about that life with you. So that's a lot of like the languages in terms of like love language and expression and how they show their adoration. It's very fascinating. One of the last things, because this is like reading is so long, is that I want to go into how you're most likely to meet them. So this one's a little bit of a doozy because the ruler of the 7th is in the 8th. So that's one of the more difficult ones for me because and it's in its final depositor state. So that can be that you meet them through a previous partner, or you meet them through a friend, or like someone you're super close with, though, like not just like a detached friend, like you meet them through somebody you're like really, really close with. But we can also look at that Jupiter in the 3rd is typically online dating. So this could be you meet someone online, or you are introduced to this person through a sibling, which would match the 7th house as well. That's someone if you're very close to your sibling, then that would be, if you have a sibling, that would be a way to fulfill both. Or you meet this person through like a previous connection, like from childhood. That can be a way in which you meet them. But typically Jupiter in the 3rd is online dating. That's typically how you're going to meet them, especially because the ruler of the descendant is kind of in a house where it's like it doesn't link to typically like a lot of experiences. Like I don't really feel comfortable telling someone, yeah, you're probably going to meet this guy through your therapist's office. Like that's kind of like an 8th house energy. Or yeah, like you're going to have a one-night stand with this guy and it just goes, you know, which is possible. You have a one-night stand with someone, or what you both agree is going to be like a one-night stand, and then it turns into a full-blown relationship. But I don't typically see that, you know, super commonly. What's another 8th house example? You could meet this person at the bank, right? Like you can meet this person, anything to deal with like a metaphysical environment or retreat. So like if you started going to like pagan circles or practices, you might find this person there, like a full moon ritual, but that's more, I mean, that kind of leaves 9th, 12th more than 8th, but that's kind of like, you know, the energy of the 8th. The 8th is kind of like weird because it's essentially private. So it's like, it's hard to meet someone somewhere where there's also a sense of privacy. So usually when I see that, I look for other signifiers. One of the, but yeah, that's what I have for you for now. So hopefully this information is helpful and you're able to gain a lot of insight from this. If you have any other questions, Sally, feel free to let me know. But I hope you really enjoyed all of these readings, and I hope that I'll be able to hear more from you soon. So thanks again. Bye.